Sup, my fellas, don't forget to leave feedback, and enjoy the story. Suddenly, a terrifying immortal king appeared, who said that the Knight of Light was truly worthy of calling him his rival. The warrior, holding his sword tightly, exclaimed that the rumors were true, because the title of the Nightmare of the Continent perfectly suits the leader of the evil spirits, but as long as the forces of light are with them, they will never give up. The leader of the undead was visible in front of him. Suddenly, the righteous Knight of Light swung his weapon. The protagonist, raising the soda to his mouth, wondered if they were fighting too much. Closing his eyes, the protagonist said that this was still a performance. The guy, introducing his clones, said that the poor guy watching everything from his room was also him, and did not understand how it came to this. After some time, a tall building was visible during the day, and someone said hello. The man, holding a notebook in his hand, explained that they were from the Special Ability Control Bureau, the Movement and Investigation Department, and asked if he was Xiang Haiyan. The protagonist, with sweat on his face, answered positively. The protagonist stood by the slightly open door and listened as his identity was confirmed, and if he suddenly woke up, he should report it to the Special Ability Control Bureau, and they wished him a good day. The protagonist bit the corners of his lips and said that it was the first time in 6 months that he had spoken to a stranger, and their conversation had just ended. The guy rummaged through his things and explained that this meant that he would not have to open the front door for the next 6 months. Squatting down, the young man added that it had been 2 years since he last went outside. Xiang Haiyan was seen leaning on his knees, and he said that some might call him pathetic, while others might accuse him of being weak-willed. Moving his legs, the protagonist added that he was a victim of a distorted world, and suddenly urgent news was heard. The protagonist looked at the screen and listened to the firefighters currently fighting the fire at the shopping mall, and it was reported that the arsonist was an awakened one, because he set the fire before he entered the other world. Suddenly, the guy's eyes lit up at the word awakened. The young man introduced the guys in a magical aura and said that overnight, all the people, one by one, began to awaken with mysterious skills known as special abilities. A magical seal appeared under the guy, and Xiang Haiyan explained that after awakening, people are forcibly transported to another world for 24 hours, and they can only return after fulfilling certain conditions. A bandit appeared, raising his palms, and the protagonist said that very few managed to return alive. With his mouth slightly open, the protagonist said that out of desperation, the awakened ones began to commit senseless crimes before entering the other world. A powerful explosion was heard, and the guy explained that 2 years ago, due to the prank of one such bastard, he lost his family and his leg. It was seen how the young man was swinging his legs and exclaimed that he even gathered the determination to try to get back on his feet. A moment later, Xiang Haiyan stopped doing the exercise. His body was covered in sweat, and he wondered what it was all for if there was no use. Squinting his eyes, the protagonist said that these were pathetic attempts. The protagonist lowered his head and asked himself why he was so afraid to just go outside, and if he had a little more determination, then maybe something would change. The guy clenched his fist and added that he would like to get out of here and go somewhere. Suddenly, the young man opened his mouth wide, and the system reported that a dimensional distortion was detected, and a connection to the Akasha system was taking place, as well as the awakening of a unique skill. Xiang Haiyan, shaking his head in different directions, clarified whether this is how awakening works. A screen appeared in front of him, stating that the unique avatar skill had been awakened. A timer appeared, and the system said that there were 24 hours left until the transition to another world. The protagonist, with his eyes bulging, asked why so suddenly, and exclaimed that this must be some kind of joke. The protagonist leaned back, and the artificial intelligence said that if he did not enter the portal of movement within the set time, he would have to use forced movement. Suddenly, the guy began to be pushed back, and he screamed loudly. Kneeling down, the young man muttered that he heard that returning back takes about a year, and since time in another world flows 10 times slower, it means he will spend as many as 10 years trying to get home again. His pupils sharply narrowed, and he wondered if he would be able to survive. Xiang Haiyan suddenly stood up, and the system said that there were 3 minutes left until his transfer. The protagonist collected his things and waited for teleportation. A moment later, the protagonist lifted his leg. The guy grabbed his head and thought that he couldn't even go outside, and here he had neither strength nor any skills. The awakened one clenched his jaw and asked himself how he was going to survive in another world. The young man's eyes widened, and he suddenly thought about it. Looking at his hand, Xiang Haiyan remembered about his skills. The protagonist realized that he had special abilities and decided to see what he got, and also opened his mouth wide and shouted that he wanted to activate the avatar skill. Suddenly, a copy appeared in front of him. The protagonist, raising his palms, was surprised that it was his clone. Suddenly, the guy closed one eye. 2 identical faces were visible, and the guy thought that these were his images. The young man collided with his avatar and muttered that this couldn't be. His pupils narrowed in surprise. A small room appeared, and the awakened one said that the copy saw the same thing as he did. the clone's eye appeared. Xianghyun, putting his hand on his lips, said that his head was spinning when trying to move and control the avatar and realized that it was impossible to move at the same time. A timer was visible on the system, and it explained that there was 1 minute left before the move, and if he did not enter the portal, he would be moved forcibly. The protagonist, putting his head on the copy, exclaimed that in such a situation, the avatar was not needed because its ability was as useless as he was. The protagonist sadly raised his eyebrows. Opening his mouth, the guy said that he wished someone could take his place. The clone looked forward seriously. The clone of the young man stepped on the magic portal, and the artificial intelligence wrote that the personally awakened one was confirmed, and the move began. A moment later, the guy stretched out his palms in front of him. An unusual aura surrounded his legs. The avatar clenched his fists, and at that very second, the move began. Xianghyun, sitting on the floor, exclaimed that he had succeeded. The protagonist added through the sweat on his face that the portal of movement had mistaken the copy for him. The magic portal dissolved into thin air, and the movement to the dimension of Ottera was complete. The protagonist suddenly appeared in the forest. The protagonist looked at his hands. The guy, with his mouth wide open, wondered what he was doing here because his avatar was supposed to move. A ladybug was visible, and the system reported that he could return to Earth through the return option in the karma store. Leaves appeared on the trees, and the artificial intelligence added that karma could be earned through adventures, and the accumulated karma was at 0. Suddenly, the young man clenched his jaw in pain. In one dimension, Xianghyun saw his hand in the room. In another world, the protagonist also noticed the palm and realized that he was not there, but simply seeing all this through the eyes of a copy. With his mouth wide open, the protagonist screamed that he was sick and was going to vomit. A second later, the guy fell to the floor. The young man abruptly covered his mouth with his hand. The awakened quickly ran to the toilet and threw up. Wiping his mouth, Xianghyun said that at least he survived the transfer and summoned his clone. Suddenly, an avatar appeared in front of him, and the protagonist said that he was simply hopeless. Looking at the double, the protagonist asked what he should do with this useless ability. Suddenly, confetti flew at him, and the system congratulated him on a new achievement, namely for returning to Earth without using the karma store. A message appeared where it was said that once a day he can move to where he was before using a portal, which the guy was perplexed. His pupils sharply narrowed, and karma was increased. In the evening, a tall building was visible, from which screams were heard that this was impossible, and the young man explained that this is how he became the first awakened to return in such a short time. Xianghyun, holding his chin, saw that his available karma points were 1,900,000. A karma shop was visible, and the protagonist wondered if it was that much just for returning the avatar, and thought that he had received points for 10 years in one go. Magical creatures appeared, and it was said that karma is calculated depending on the influence a person has in another world, and good deeds or bad, murders or honest work, it all doesn't matter. A silhouette of a man appeared above the planet Earth, and an explanation that the accumulated karma can be used to improve abilities or return to Earth. The protagonist sat down on the couch and asked himself if this was a mistake, and what if he had to go to another world. Throwing his hands behind his head, the guy exclaimed that he did not know that this would work, so what difference did it make to him? A notification was visible in which one could find out more about increasing status, and the young man said that he was on Earth, so returning was pointless. Poking at the screen, Xianghyun asked what was in the status increase section. His finger reached for the button for increasing the ability to regenerate. Opening his mouth, the protagonist was surprised by the regeneration. The protagonist moved his legs and selected an item in the system. Suddenly, a magical glow enveloped the guy's wounded knees. Through the sweat on his face, the awakened one said that he felt something in his legs. A moment later, the young man moved his heel. The veins in his legs were visible, and he noticed that his injury had been healed abruptly. Xianghyun remembered sitting and watching the explosion and said that the pain in his leg was not just an inconvenience to him, but that this injury marked his farewell to his family. The protagonist was shown holding crutches and added that it was because of this that he did not leave the room. A magical aura surrounded his lower body, and the system exclaimed that his regeneration ability had exceeded the standard level, and he had also received the super regeneration skill, which increases the power of recovery. After some time, the moon was shining brightly in the sky. The protagonist was doing sports exercises and explained that with the help of the points he received, he increased his karma and was able to heal his leg, and added that they had become very strong. The guy, smiling, said that he still had a lot of karma left and wondered where to use it. The young man thought about improving the skill and tapped the screen. His body was covered in sweat, and the awakened one asked what he could do if he improved his avatar. Xianghyun grabbed his chin questioningly. A clone appeared in front of him, and the protagonist said that he was a real man, and the double asked if he had worked on his body, to which he received the answer that it was all thanks to hard training. It was seen how the two guys happily raised their hands, and the protagonist said that after awakening the avatar, His consciousness was divided into two, which allowed him to move freely. The young man, grinning, added that he received a new ability by improving his weapon skills, and at the same time, the notification said that he can choose what information will be sent to him. The awakened one pushed his copy and said that this means that not only will he get rid of disorientation, but he will also not feel pain even if the avatar is hurt. A moment later, Xianghyun turned around. The protagonist opened his mouth wide and exclaimed that he could go to another world while sitting at home and wrapped in a blanket. It seemed like the protagonist had entered the game world, and he explained that he had the ability to control the avatar like in the game. Suddenly, 3 clones appeared, and the guy added that this was not the only change, because now there were 3 of them. Squinting his eyes, the awakened one asked if the number of his avatars would increase during the development process, and thought that he might get confused, but this would not work, so he needed to decide on names. The guys lowered their heads, repeating each other's movements, and said that calling them avatars was not very good, but the thought did not occur to him. The young man noticed a package of ketchup on the table and realized that this was what he needed. Xianghyun, lowering the corners of his lips, decided that his clone was now called Hands, and his characteristics appeared. The protagonist looked at another double and exclaimed that he would be Heinz, and his description was also visible. Frowning, the protagonist wondered what kind of ability this was and muttered that it was terrible. Squinting, the awakened one wondered if it was time for him to complete the most anticipated quest. It was visible how one of the avatars was surrounded by a magical aura. The guy was holding the trash that had accumulated over the year and exclaimed that it was time to go forward to another world. Suddenly, hands evaporated into thin air. The young man, holding out his hand, hid from the sun's rays. Through the sweat on his face, he thought that he was not worried at all. Raising his palm, Xianghyun muttered that the center of the mind was working normally. The protagonist sharply lowered his eyebrows and thought that Hands must also be in another world. Suddenly, legs surrounded by an unusual aura appeared. Hands, standing in the forest, said that it was night here. A light appeared in the bushes, and the double said that there seemed to be no one in this peaceful forest at first glance. Suddenly a menacing animal was visible, and the avatar asked how it was possible to appear so suddenly. The enemy suddenly rushed from the spot. The protagonist began to take out a knife from behind his back. The guy put it in front of him. The animal grabbed the dagger with its mouth. The young man, through the sweat on his face, said that it was disgusting. The awakened one stepped back and muttered that as expected, there was no fear or pain at all. Xianghyun suddenly swung the knife and used a mana strike, and also realized that everything here was exactly like in the game. A light trace remained from the attack. A splash of blood appeared. The protagonist fell to the ground, killing his enemy. His dagger glowed brightly. The protagonist raised his head and asked if it was hard for him because he hadn't leveled up enough, adding that he would be in big trouble if he stayed here and ran into another monster. Suddenly, the clone's pupils narrowed. A village was visible in the distance. After a while, the village elder appeared, greeted the traveler and told him his name. Holding his hands behind his back, Malcolm said that the guy was walking along a forest path teeming with monsters, and at a late hour, which impressed him, to which the young man replied that he now had wounds all over his body. Scratching the back of his head, Hands asked if he could stop in the village for the night. The man, closing his eyes, exclaimed that of course he could, because they should help each other, and the clone thanked him. The village elder, moving his legs, said that he saw such clothes and equipment for the first time, and asked if he came from far away, and the protagonist explained that he got a little lost, walked and ended up here. Malcolm, closing his eyes, said that he was glad to meet a new face in a long time, and offered to drink at the tavern. After some time, Xianghyun's elbow appeared. Lying on the bed, the protagonist said that he was even given a room, and the longer he stays here, the more he thinks that the people here are very kind, and wondered how much time has passed since the last time he was happy to communicate. Yawning widely, the guy said that it was a good day. Suddenly, a stranger entered his room. It was visible how the awakened one happily raised a glass with a drink. The young man, clenching his jaw, exclaimed that eating chicken after a shower, traveling around the world, is beauty. The protagonist said through sweat on his face that he felt a bit awkward in front of Heinz. The double sighed heavily, and Xianghyun said that the copy was currently training to use his survivability and didn't know when he would have to send him away, so let him do it. The guy smiled and said that it was all great. But no matter how hard the clones worked, he needed to learn more about what was going on in the other world and what kind of place it was. The protagonist took out his laptop and thought that he would be a great leader. Suddenly, a glass of drink fell to the floor. The protagonist, biting the corners of his lips, felt something ominous. Suddenly, the system reported that the avatar was dead and all skills and acquired data would be reset, which made the awakened one, with bulging eyes, wonder if Hands had died. Pointing his finger at the system screen, the protagonist thoughtfully said that Hands had died in that village. The boy remembered Malcolm closing his eyes and said that it was to be expected and assumed that it was the work of that old man. A mug of beer appeared on the table and the boy decided that the man could have added something to the drink. Putting his hand to his head, the awakened one muttered that it was very thoughtless of him. Sunghyun suddenly opened his eyes and realized that he had connected to his avatar again. The village elder, folding his hands behind his back, admitted that he thought the guy would be useful, but in fact turned out to be empty, to which the servant agreed and said that it turned out unpleasant. Raising his eyebrows, Malcolm said that this young man got to them through the forest alone, so he thought that he was very difficult. The clone of the main character sat with his head down, and the man said that he had become another elite skeleton. Raising his hand, Hans didn't understand what kind of nonsense this was, and the system responded that the character's race had been changed to undead, and then indicated new characteristics. Spreading his fingers, the monster-shaped youth asked if he was undead, and the system reported that due to the effect of the center of the mind, his mind was not damaged. The elite skeleton clenched his jaw. His pupils noticeably shrank, and the clone of the protagonist wondered what was going on and where he was. There was a crowd of evil spirits standing next to him, and the copy of the protagonist did not understand what kind of nonsense this was. Clenching his jaw, Hans wondered if it was possible that these bastards had turned all the residents into undead. Mutilated citizens were visible near the wall. A guy entered the basement, and the avatar of the awakened one wondered who else it was. Lowering his head, the elite skeleton remembered that the guy was in the tavern yesterday. Putting his hands in his pockets, Jeffy wondered how much longer he would have to hang around in this hole. And the evil spirits did not understand whether the people he met were black magicians. Suddenly, the resident looked at the skeleton and screamed. The young man narrowed his eyes, and the copy of the protagonist wondered why he was staring and whether he had noticed that he had come to his senses. The townsman pointed his finger forward, asking why the knuckle was there, and complaining about why he had to redo everything everyone else had done, then ordered the undead to stand in another place. A bead of sweat appeared on his skull, and Hans thought about how even though his heart was no longer working, he was about to have a heart attack. Suddenly, the elite skeleton's elbow began to rise. The undead stood up and realized that he could feel a force trying to force him to move against his will, and decided that if he concentrated, he could ignore it, but he supposed it was best to obey for now. Looking away, Jeffy wondered why the elder always made him check these weirdos, and noted that the old man was very meticulous. The boy took a step forward, and the protagonist's clone realized that this influence was very familiar to him. Suddenly, the door to the basement slammed shut. Looking at his hand, Hans thought that it was the same force that moved his dead body. Clenching his fist, the elite skeleton thought that this was all because of the mana attraction skill, and it seemed that he understood how it worked. Standing behind the crowd of undead, the boy in the form of a monster suggested that he might be able to take control of all the other undead. A week later, a village appeared. An empty floor was visible in the room. The elite skeleton was sitting on a box. The copy of the protagonist exhaled heavily. A moment later, his eyes began to emit a magical aura. The undead in front of him began to rise. The boy in the form of a monster looked forward. The undead in front of him stood up, and Hans said that he was finally able to completely control the others. The skeleton in armor began to dance, and the clone of the protagonist thought that this was too much, and said that so far everything was going very peculiarly. Putting his palm to his skull, the monster realized that he could only influence one undead, not a crowd, and asked if the elite skeleton was capable of more. Suddenly, someone squealed, and Hans narrowed his eyes in confusion. A rat was running near his feet. The avatar of the awakened one grabbed the animal with his fingers, which made it squeak even louder. Holding the mouse by the tail, the guy in the form of a monster thought that here it was, and after all, it was the one that had been gnawing at his heels all week. Squinting, the elite skeleton thought about how fast and small the rat was. Sitting on the box, the undead thought about what he had just said, and began to think about what would happen if an animal, not a person, was under the influence. A magical glow appeared from his finger, and the copy of the main character, after a pause, wondered if it was worth trying. The skeleton's back appeared, and the rat squeaked loudly. At the same second, the mouse fell lifelessly onto his palm. A moment later, the animal's eyes began to glow. Clenching his fist, Hans realized that he had succeeded. Releasing the pet from his hands, the copy of the protagonist told Alfred to run forward, because the operation of the night watch was beginning, and with his help it would be possible to find out everything necessary. Raising his paw, the rat sniffed. Jeffy closed the door to the basement and muttered that you just need to wait and see, and then began to talk about the old man, to which the mouse thought that this guy was constantly whining. Putting the key into the lock, the young man wondered what was in the other warehouse and whether there were more undead there. Reaching out his hand forward, the assistant did not understand whether he should follow him. Suddenly, purple magic began to dissipate in the air, and Hans did not understand what it was. Alfred stood near the door emitting energy flows, and the elite skeleton realized that even if he turned off all emotions with the center of the mind, he would still instinctively feel. Swinging his tail, the pet realized that it was dangerous to come closer. A bright moon was visible in the night sky. The assistant, putting his hands on his hips, said that he tried hard, and Jeffy asked when the maturation process would end. Spreading his palms, the guy said that because of the fragment of the immortal king, sometimes it seems like a part of him is sucked out when he comes there. To which the interlocutor clarified how soon this will happen, because the teacher gets stuck there every day. Opening his mouth wide, the young man asked if it was funny that they guard here too, and traps are set not only throughout the village, but here too, and then added that because of this, not even a mouse can run through. Alfred sniffed the ground, and Hans thanked him for the information and thought that the thing he saw was probably a fragment of the immortal king. The rat raised its head, and the elite skeleton thought about where he could gather more information, and did not understand where that old bastard had gone. Suddenly, a dark magical beam pierced the pet. The black silhouette of the rat opened its mouth wide. Malcolm began to slowly approach the animal. Raising his eyebrows, the village elder said that this is what it is, and in fact, a simple mouse. The clone of the protagonist wondered if he had been exposed, and the old man closed his eyes and said that black magic does not sense the undead, but its corpse is filled with dark mana. Alfred spread his paws to the sides, and the man wondered if the influence of mana had turned the rat into an evil spirit. The animal fell to the ground, and the old man decided that there was only one place overflowing with dark mana. Smiling, Malcolm clarified whether Jeffy was the main one in the warehouse today, to which the guys exclaimed that there was a teacher in front of them. The mouse lay lifeless on the ground, and the elite skeleton asked him for forgiveness and promised that he would definitely avenge him. Grinning viciously, the clone of the protagonist asked Alfred to keep an eye on him from the sky. The buildings in the village were visible. The assistant opened the door to the basement with a kick and exclaimed who could have known that a rat would appear here, and why the damned old man would raise such a fuss over a rodent. Pointing his finger forward, Jeffy shouted why the evil spirits were standing God knows how, after which he ordered them to straighten up. Taking a step forward, the student declared that the skeleton was a stupid spawn. Hitting him with his fist, the guy clarified who he told to stand properly. Approaching the floor, the assistant asked the undead again. Grabbing the monster by the hair, Jeffy asked who they had here. Smiling, the young man asked if this was the arrogant asshole who had spoken out against him, and if this was the skeleton that had threatened to kill him if he did anything to his family. Forcing a smile, the assistant asked the undead to repeat what he had said then, and then remembered that he had torn out its tongue. Throwing the monster's head on the floor, the boy said that it wasn't so funny anymore. Throwing his hands behind his head, the student said that it was fun when they tracked down every bastard in the village. The monster lay lifeless on the ground. Approaching the girl, Jeffy said that the guy should still be happy because his wife was here, after which he clarified where his children were and that there were little assholes in other families. Suddenly, the zombie grabbed him by the shoulder and was preparing to bite. The guy fell to the floor and asked what the hell had happened to him. The undead was advancing on his opponent, who was yelling at him to stop and repeating it. Putting his magic seal forward, the boy exclaimed that his opponent was a bastard. A moment later, the monster girl covered his mouth with her palm. His pupils visibly narrowed in fear. The crowd of undead began to advance on the assistant. The zombies all attacked the annoying inspector. Hans was visible among the other skeletons. His eyes lit up, and the clone of the protagonist declared that their revenge was just beginning. The protagonist, spreading his arms in different directions, exclaimed that his brother lived in this village, to which the warrior clarified whether he had left so long ago. The guard, pushing the guy, asked why he even thought that they would let some stranger in, and the boy replied that they should arrange a meeting for him with the village elder. The man, holding his hands behind his back, asked what all this was about. Malcolm, looking at the boys, said that he was the village chief. Seong-hyun greeted him, to which the elder, wide-eyed, asked who he was. The awakened one, placing his palm on his chest, explained that he thought his twin brother Hans was somewhere around here. A skeleton's leg showed, and he thought that having two avatars would certainly come in handy in moments like this. Dark energy swirled around the monsters, and the protagonist added that thanks to Heinz, who distracted the old man, he easily obtained the fragment of the immortal king. The clone, looking at the artifact, was greatly surprised by its power. The magical item glowed brightly, and the double wondered if it was absorbing the dark energy from the undead around it, and realized that most likely the fragment was resonating to make up for what it lacked. The skeleton sharply looked to the side. Looking at the tall evil spirits, the copy thought that everyone here looked insanely strong, and it seemed that the place where he had been before was a garbage warehouse. Stretching out his hand, the protagonist muttered that it pissed him off because these bastards dared to object. Clenching his fist, the protagonist exclaimed to himself that now they will know what it is like. A powerful energy shone in front of him. After some time, Seong-hyun appeared, who extended his palm and explained that they were twins. Touching his head, the awakened one said that it meant that they could always tell where the other was, to which the elder replied that it was rather hard to believe. Suddenly, the man looked to the side. Looking at the guard, Malcolm exclaimed that something was wrong with the fragment. a magical monster appeared and an order was heard to kill this bastard. The warriors sharply raised their spears and called the monster a beast. Suddenly, the magical body disappeared and the guys did not understand where it went. The skeleton, taking hold of the skull, muttered that it was an irresistible flow of negative emotions. Squeezing his neck, the double thought that the center of the mind was filtering out information, but it fell with incredible force. Suddenly, an unusual aura surrounded his body, and the clone wondered if anyone could withstand this and remain sane. A moment later, a powerful surge of energy was heard, and the system reported that his essence met the conditions. A second later, the skeleton moved its legs. The boy's eyes lit up with purple flames, and the artificial intelligence said that the rank had increased due to the power of the fragment of the immortal king, and the dark magic hidden in the fragment had assimilated with the essence, and he also received a special skill, demonic wisdom. A magical artifact was visible through the bones of the protagonist, and it was written that the special skill grants a gift for dark magic and its absolute understanding. A young man appeared, who sighed heavily and, turning to Jeffy, said that this bastard could not cope with the zombie rat and now he had to fix everything. Suddenly, he clenched his jaw from a loud scream. Touching his head, the guy exclaimed to the teacher that everything was fine, to which he was told to shut up and check the fragment, and also to contact Jeffy. The subordinate, looking through the bars, exclaimed for Jeffy to quickly check the fragment. Taking hold of the iron bars, he clarified whether they could hear him. Suddenly, a human silhouette appeared, which was glowing brightly. The guy behind the bars did not understand why he was silent. Suddenly, green hands approached him. Many zombies appeared, and the skeleton greeted the boy. The monster, opening its jaw, asked if the weather was good today. The young man, baring his teeth, wondered how this was possible and how it could talk. Many palms tried to reach the guy. Suddenly, he threw a magic sphere at his opponents. A moment later, the zombies knocked down the door. The skeleton, moving its legs, said that it was indecent to ignore people when they greeted you. Dark energy circled above his hand, and the evil spirits did not know whether demonic wisdom was somehow connected with this. The monster, looking at the magical light, thought that just by looking at dark magic, he already knew how to use it. After some time, a powerful explosion appeared. The monster's leg appeared, which ordered the undead to move forward. The protagonist, stretching out his palm, said that they should not let anyone escape and let them kill everyone in this village. A bright flash was visible in the distance. The skeleton, lowering his head, was very surprised. The elder, stretching out his index finger, said that he definitely had to become an elite skeleton. Holding the magic staff, the man asked what he did with the fragment of the immortal king. The protagonist, looking at Malcolm, said that they had not seen each other for a long time and clarified whether he remembered him. Putting his palm on his chest, a copy of the protagonist explained that thanks to him, he lost his heart. His magical artifact emitted dark energy, and the skeleton added that that is why he found a new one in the warehouse. The elder bared his teeth menacingly and exclaimed that he had the audacity to combine a fragment of an immortal king with such an insignificant body. Raising his finger, the man shouted for him to die and used his skill. Suddenly, dark magic rushed towards the protagonist. A moment later, the monster lost a limb. Through sweat on his face, the skeleton asked if he really didn't know any manners, since attacking someone who was speaking was rude. Malcolm, frowning menacingly, told him to shut up and added that he had spent a lot of strength and resources during the entire year of this maturation. Releasing dark energy, the man said that he was close to gaining a power that was more powerful than anything in the world, so it could not end with simply turning an elite skeleton into a tiny undead. Suddenly, unusual spikes appeared. The skeleton, lowering its head, wondered if it wanted to defeat a newbie with high-ranking magic. The monster, holding out his palm, explained that he was the only one who could control the fragment and he would not succeed. The elder, spreading his fingers, exclaimed that he did not know how he was able to cope with the destruction, but he would destroy his body and use it for experiments. The protagonist's clone, opening his jaw, shouted for him to stop chanting skills before using them, because it pissed him off, and also added that Alfred's killer should finally die. Malcolm, lowering his hands, clarified whether he knew anyone from the village, and whether he had really come here on purpose. Suddenly, the old man turned around. Magic thorns tried to attack him. The man, frowning, thought that it did not matter, and muttered that his opponent quickly got used to dark magic and wondered if it was because of the fragment. Raising his palm, he realized that he could not afford to waste time here and used the destruction ability. It seemed as if Seonghyun had touched the girl in the back. The protagonist, with his eyes wide open, asked what had happened to her. Unexpectedly, unusual energy was coming out of the mouths of the villagers, and the protagonist did not understand whether the souls of dark magicians were dissolving. Malcolm abruptly reached for the crown of the broken. Having put it on himself, he decided to return to the abode of the dead. The skeleton, clenching his jaw, asked whether he had increased his strength at the cost of the souls of dark magicians. The elder opened his mouth wide and shouted that he would have a chance to win if he had all the power of this fragment, but now he would die. It was visible how the man's eyes suddenly darkened. Suddenly, a magic projectile flew at him. The monster, stretching out his finger, said that he almost fell asleep while he was saying this and suggested that he finish this. Licking his mouth, the copy of the protagonist added that thanks to him, he delved into dark magic. The old man, falling to the ground, did not understand how he could have died so senselessly. It seemed as if Malcolm had fallen off his feet. The skeleton, raising his head, hoped that he had seen everything, because he had taken care to put an end to his revenge. Looking at the sky, the double of the main character muttered for Alfred to rest in peace. After some time, a castle was visible at night. Inside it, a girl was sitting on the floor. She crossed her fingers in bewilderment. Touching the wall, Milady called Martin. The man, closing his eyes, asked if she had finished praying. Ristar clenched her fist and asked if she could ask him to contact the others. The girl, stretching out her palm, said that a sign of the resurrection of the immortal king had been detected from the west, which made the saint ask her again. Martin, moving his legs, replied that he understood and would immediately gather a council. Milady, sweat on her face, remembered that the one who had been resurrected had brought horror to the continent hundreds of years ago. Looking out the window, she muttered that she would not allow something like that to happen again. Taking a step forward, the skeleton said that there was some kind of devastation around him, and at least several hundred undead had been destroyed. Smiling, Hans noted that losses were always replenished, so there was no need to be sad, and the coolest thing about necromancy was the ability to create soldiers from corpses. Looking worriedly at his broken limb, the copy of the protagonist decided that he needed to take care of his arm first. The undead looked around. Breaking off the corpse's limb, the clone of the protagonist said that it looked pretty good. Putting the bones to his shoulder, the elite skeleton began to activate super regeneration. Clenching the fist of his new hand, the youth in the guise of a monster exclaimed that it was perfect and then wondered who he should start with. Opening his mouth wide, the undead screamed at the dead skeleton to become his subordinate. Raising the creature off the ground with magic, Hans thought about the evil wisdom whispering the way. The monster spread its fingers and thought about how the fragment of the immortal king gave it power. Raising its head, the clone of the protagonist asked in its thoughts to defile the remaining magical power in the body and cleanse it of the fragments of thoughts. Suddenly, pieces of bones flew off its subordinate. Raising its hands, the clone of the protagonist asked if it had worked. A zombie made its way through the crowd of undead. Folding its arms, the elite skeleton said that after several repetitions, it finally got through. Glancing at the old man, the monster said what it would do now. Reaching out to the man's body, Hans asked if he should turn him into an undead with a soul in order to extract information from him. Suddenly, narrowing its pupils, the guy in the form of a monster thought about it. Grabbing the old man by the clothes, the monster asked why he did not have a soul. A magical seal appeared on the village elder's body, and the elite skeleton assumed that his soul was somehow extracted through this circle, and perhaps it was some kind of security measure. Throwing the man to the ground, the prototype of the protagonist stated that it would be strange of them not to think of such a small thing, given the scale of what was happening, and then decided that it did not matter and they could still use his body. Forming a magical sphere in his palm, Hans wanted to turn him into a high-level undead with consciousness and good combat skills. Spreading his fingers, the clone of the protagonist began to desecrate the remaining magic in the body. The old man's skull appeared, and the monster continued to collect Malcolm's thoughts and strengthen his personality. At the same time, the elite skeleton's eyes flashed red and blue. The bearded man turned into a death mage and muttered that he was waiting for his master's order. Taking his subordinate by the shoulder, the guy in the monster's guise was surprised that he was even talking, although he did not expect such a result, after which he told the skeleton that his name was Malcolm, and from now on he must obey him. Having hit the undead on the head, Hans ordered him to answer, to which he received a positive exclamation. Frowning, the clone of the protagonist thought that although the monster had lost his memories, all his sins had not gone away, so he needed to mock him to the fullest. The elite skeleton called out to his ward, to which he, taking hold of his cane, responded. Raising his palm, the prototype of the protagonist noted that this cane looked pretty good. Hans snatched it from the hands of his subordinate. The zombie opened his mouth, and the evil spirit thought about him. Approaching him, the undead remembered that this was a young zombie who had killed Jeffy along with him. Putting his hand on his head, the elite skeleton decided that it was time for him to rest in peace with his family. A moment later, the crowd of undead began to burn with a bright flame. Several bones fell onto the table. Holding his stomach, Seong-hun said that he ate too much, and it was very tasty. Picking up his phone, the protagonist decided to check the rate of gold in their days. Closing his eyes, the protagonist remembered that because the village was inhabited by magicians, there was a lot of gold there, and just think how much treasure they had accumulated. Spreading his fingers, the awakened one wanted to look at the loot and decided to summon Hans. Suddenly, an elite skeleton appeared in front of him. The undead grinned, and the guy began to scream. Opening his mouth in alarm, the protagonist shouted that he wanted to cancel the summoning. Sitting on the floor, the protagonist exhaled with relief and admitted that he thought he was going to die. Scratching his head, the young man did not understand what to do, because Hans had to summon him, and then wondered if he should first strengthen his unique skill, after which he decided to go to the karma store. On the system screen, the awakened one selected the desired item and said that he had earned much more than he expected, because the last time he had a little more than 400,000. The guy clenched his fist, and the system reported that now the number of avatars could increase, and his mental strength exceeded the norm. Xiangyan acquired the skill Serenity, the characteristics of which appeared on the screen, and looked forward, closing his lips. The protagonist began to put the jewelry in a bag. Looking at the clone, the young man realized that given that he felt fine, despite the fact that he was standing next to him, it turns out that Serenity could be applied to himself, unlike the center of the mind. Grinning, the awakened one thought that it was very strange that he got the right skills every time, after which he said that it was wonderful. Throwing the bag over his shoulder, the boy announced that it was time to sell the gold. Many valuable coins fell into his bags. The bank employees were surprised by the glow of the treasures, and Xiangyan politely asked them to deposit all the funds into his account. The representatives of the financial institution bowed and thanked the protagonist for their trust, to which he wished them good work. Grinning, the protagonist thought about what Hans hid in his shadow with the help of dark magic just in case. The face of the elite skeleton was covered, and the young man thought about even putting a mask on it, because he might need to summon him, to which he asked if there was another mask. The awakened exclaimed that he probably worried in vain, when suddenly a powerful explosion occurred behind him. The huge monster rose to its feet, making terrible sounds. Grinning, the monster said that they hit the jackpot. Holding the bag in his paw, the werewolf asked who would have thought that there was so much gold in such a remote place, to which his partner said that it was time to stop talking and that they needed to leave. The bandits rushed forward, and one of them shouted that he knew it. Opening his mouth in alarm, Xiangyan cried out that they were villains and asked for someone to report them. The monster's eyes lit up, and it was said that bandits were those who committed crimes using their awakened powers. The protagonist's lips turned down in confusion, and it was explained that there were also those who protected citizens from such bastards. The protagonist appeared, sitting on the asphalt. The werewolf pushed the young man in the shoulder and shouted for him to shut up. Putting his hand to his cheek, the awakened one thought about the guards having to track them down. Gritting his teeth in fear, the guy realized that he himself could not do anything. The villains ran around the room, and one of them said that this was great and everything was going according to plan, to which the other said that they had plenty of time and the guards would arrive in 3 minutes. With his eyes wide, the awakened one said that they just needed to get to the portal, to which the monster clarified if she was here. Opening his mouth wide, the guy in the form of a wolf shouted the name of his partner. Raising the girl's head, the werewolf asked her to wake up and wondered who did this to her, and the other young man asked the wolf to look away. An elite skeleton appeared in front of the villains, and the awakened one clarified if the guards were there, to which his partner noted that this bastard was not one of them. Waving his hand, the undead thought that Xiangyan was not capable of anything. The bandits raised their hands in fear and began to scream. The evil spirit bared his teeth and told himself that Hans was different. Someone shouted that they needed to run here, and the captain of the guards turned around and asked his assistants to get moving. The member of the South Korean Returned Association frowned and asked if he was going to miss him again this time. The guy stopped and clenched his jaw. After looking around the room, the villain hunter did not understand what had happened here. The werewolf's face appeared, and the young man realized that someone had dealt with them and disappeared. The awakened was lying on the boxes, and the guard said that this stranger could not have gone far. Putting his palm forward, the guard told his charges to look around. A trace of dark magical energy was visible on the floor. Xiangyan stretched up and said that he had warmed up well. The main character walked down the street and said that sometimes relieving stress like this is a pretty good idea. A smiling Heinz appeared, and the system reported his characteristics. The clone of the protagonist looked at the huge structures and exclaimed that he had finally arrived. Grinning, the prototype remembered what Malcolm had told him about a city in the east, not far from here, and said that the old man had not lied after all. Clenching his fist, the awakened one said that Heinz had finally made her debut in another world. Leaves were falling near an empty shed. Small houses were visible, and the protagonist did not understand why the city was so empty. Closing his lips, the prototype muttered that there was no security at the entrance, and they were not at all interested in newcomers, when suddenly someone was heard from around the corner asking if this was a joke. Pointing his finger at a little girl, the bully noted that he had warned her, to which she apologized and said that she would do everything if they gave her a little more time. The townswoman's eyes widened in fear, and the bandit said that they had to pay them 2 silver coins, for which he gave her 3 days, after which he added that if there was no money, they would have no other choice. The protagonist looked in their direction and thought about the fact that local thugs and a young girl who was being manipulated were a boring cliché, after which he decided to pass by because it was none of his business. The stranger crashed into the awakened man's shoulder and screamed in pain. The girl bowed her head and asked to be forgiven, and the young man turned to her. Heinz lowered his eyebrows and asked if she knew the city well, and realized that he needed a guide anyway. Raising her eyebrows, the young girl asked him again and asked who the uncle was. Showing her 2 silver coins, the clone of the protagonist stated that he could be her employer. The girl's eyes sparkled with joy when the stranger offered to discuss the terms. Pointing to a small building, the girl said that this inn would be one of the best places for him to stay. Diana closed her eyes and asked what the uncle thought about it and if he liked it, while the protagonist explained that the girl was barely paying off her debts and also taking care of her sick brother after the loss of their parents, and was not yet able to pay the local tax. Handing the girl the coins, Heinz asked her to come to him tomorrow as soon as she woke up. The young man collapsed on the bed and thought about the girl agreeing to be his guide for 2 silver coins a day, after which he decided that he would think that he was doing a good deed, even if the stranger simply wanted to rob him. It was dark outside in front of the house, and from there he heard the prototype say that it was time to sleep. Scratching the back of his head, the guy was indignant at the fact that the bed was terribly uncomfortable and it was impossible to fall asleep, and suddenly he heard someone sneeze. The awakened one went out onto the balcony and did not understand who was there, while someone coughed again. The clone of the main character saw Diana under the house and called out to her. Closing her eyes, the girl greeted him, to which he asked why she was waiting for him there. Sitting at the table, Heinz sighed heavily and asked the city girl not to do this anymore and to come closer to lunch. Holding the food in her hands, Diana agreed with her uncle, who repeated that he had already told her not to call him that. Pointing her finger at a piece of bread, the girl asked if her new acquaintance had eaten enough, to which he allowed her to take the food if she was hungry. Smiling, the city dweller thanked her interlocutor. A wide street appeared, and it was said that this small town was called Azanthu, located on the western edge of the kingdom of Talia. Putting his hand to the wall, the prototype said that it somehow reminded him of an ordinary medieval town. There was a drawing on the wall, and the awakened one noticed that this symbol was drawn everywhere. Bringing his face closer to the wall, the young man assumed that it looked like paint, but his guide explained that it was blood. Closing his eyes, the awakened one clarified whether this was true, because it did not seem so to him. Diana asked if Heinz had eaten venison soup yesterday, to which he turned around worriedly and responded approvingly, and then asked how she knew about it. Putting her finger to her nose, the girl said that she could smell very well, to which the protagonist's clone thought that this was very interesting, and since she had such a good sense of smell, it could be her special skill. Putting his hand in his pocket, the guy asked what this symbol meant, to which the townswoman replied that it was the emblem of the Varkalak Guild, which controlled this place. The girl pressed her back against her new acquaintance and began to talk about this guild. Putting his hand on the battle, the protagonist's clone asked if something was right, to which the interlocutor exclaimed that she could smell it. Diana lowered the corners of her lips, hearing the question about what she was feeling right now. Clenching her fists, the girl shouted that it was freshly baked bread and that the uncle simply had to try it, to which he cried out in bewilderment. The interlocutor went forward, and the guy clarified whether the girl had eaten a minute ago and was already hungry. Traces of smell in the air led to the passage between the buildings. A bloody trail appeared under the feet of a man in the passage. A few days later, Heinz, folding his arms, said that his guide had never been late before and suggested that something might have happened. Suddenly, someone called out to the young man, to which he looked towards the stranger. The hooligan frowned and said that they needed to talk, to which the prototype of the main character wondered if the time had really come. Extending his palms filled with coins, the awakened one asked them to take it. The avatar closed his eyes and said that there wasn't much there, but hoped that it would help maintain public order, to which the bandit said that they had quickly found a common language, and the clone realized that he had just taken money with him for such a case. There was a drawing on the stranger's neck, and the young man realized that he had the same symbol as on the city walls. Heinz lowered the corners of his lips, remembering how Diana had told him not to even think about hiding in the alleys, and that it would be better to leave the city as soon as possible, after which he thought about how much they had scared the girl that she was so afraid of them. Clenching his hand into a fist, the bandit asked his partner why he had grabbed that brat, to which he replied that he had no way of knowing, and they were just doing what they were told. Heinz, his mouth slightly open, thought about the hooligan's words and silently prayed that it wouldn't turn out that these two bastards had grabbed Diana. The awakened one shouted for the men to wait a minute, to which they turned around and asked again. Clenching his fist, the prototype of the protagonist decided that it was important to guess the moment in such things, and if it became dangerous, he would simply cancel the explosion. Frowning, the young man exclaimed that he wanted to know something, when suddenly someone called his uncle. Turning his head back, the clone of the protagonist was surprised by the appearance of a new acquaintance. The bandits' eyes turned white, and they asked what their friend was interested in. Smiling, the awakened one exhaled heavily and said that the silver he gave them was enough. Raising the bag up, the clone of the protagonist said that they took everything. The guy opened his mouth wide and shouted that they should have met a long time ago, and then asked if the townswoman could imagine it, and said that she would be going without dinner today. Diana, her eyes wide with disappointment, said that her younger brother had disappeared. Wiping away her tears with her hand, the girl reported that her relative had recently gotten much better because he had finally been able to eat, but now his sister could not find him anywhere. Heinz, turning down the corners of his lips, wondered if it was possible that those guys were talking about the interlocutor's brother. The awakened one asked if it could be Varkalak and what were the chances that they had taken her brother, and then said that he had heard them talking about some small child, which caused tears to start flowing from the girl's eyes. Clutching her head, the townswoman denied it, and the interlocutor asked her not to worry so much, because if the villains demanded a ransom, he would help with the money. The girl, her eyes wide with alarm, said that they really did take her younger brother, then added that Aaron would die because all they needed was blood and money wouldn't help. Raising his hand, the prototype of the protagonist clarified why they needed blood, and the interlocutor began to tell about this city. A dark silhouette with red eyes tormented a man, and the townswoman explained that this was a warehouse with live blood bags for vampires. Someone's legs appeared, and the stranger muttered that the smell of dark mana was very strong. Standing on the roof, the villain asked if they really killed each other because of the fragment of the immortal king, after which he admitted that he was sorry because he wanted to destroy the fragment as soon as it was fully mature. The vampire clenched his fangs and said that he had no idea who stole it, but he knew where the person was heading. Folding his arms, the evil spirit decided that it would not be difficult to find the thief. Heinz asked the girl again, to which she replied that including Varkalak, all organizations were run by vampires, when suddenly someone's silhouette appeared. Tears were streaming down the cheeks of the townswoman, and she said that even if the new acquaintance escaped from the city, none of them would survive. Sadly raising her eyebrows, Diana said that they were doing everything in their power to hold on, and were trying hard day after day. The townswoman fell to her knee and said that she and her younger brother would be eaten anyway. Taking the girl's head, the young man asked her to come to her senses. With his mouth wide open, the young man explained that if her words were true, then they did not have much time, and then asked if the girl knew where they could take her brother. Excitedly raising her eyebrows, the townswoman answered negatively and clarified whether the new acquaintance was going to help her. The prototype of Xianghyun grinned when he heard that it was dangerous to go on alone, and then asked his interlocutor not to worry. His eyes sparkled, and the clone said that he knew how to beat up this undead, and then decided that the mission to help the unlucky girl began. Coins fell on the table, and someone said that he was going for broke. Smiling, the bandit asked where such a debtor came from, how his opponent would get such a big amount of money, to which he replied that he robbed a fool this morning and made a good profit. Suddenly, Heinz entered the room. Clenching his fist, the clone of the protagonist asked what kind of fool he was and who he was, to which the bandit asked everyone to wait. With a wide grin, the hooligan exclaimed that the fool they had robbed had come to see them, and then asked if the young man had come to give them more money. A wounded man was kneeling near the entrance, and the villains wanted to know if he wanted to share and what had happened to the guards, whether he had slipped them a coin or not. The bandit put his hand on the head of the awakened man, to which he said that he would not ask a second time, and asked where they had hidden the child. Putting out his fingers, the man asked if the stranger had gone crazy and if he even knew who he was dealing with. A moment later, a knife was stabbed into his neck. Frowning, Heinz said that he knew exactly what a scumbag his opponent was and called people who interfered in families to satisfy their selfish greed. With his mouth wide open, the prototype of the main character shouted that they were scum. Having pulled the blade out of the enemy's body, the young man thought that he had dealt with one and there were two more left. The bandit asked who this guy was, to which the other frowned and cried out if he understood where he was. Gritting his teeth, the clone of the protagonist remembered that he had vitality and excellent super regeneration skills, so he could cope. A bright trace of the attack remained in the air. Grinning, the villain screamed loudly. Heinz swung his weapon, when suddenly one of the opponents exclaimed that the blade would not come out. At the same second, the dagger pierced the guy's head, and the protagonist thought that he had killed two. Smiling, the awakened one explained that it was a Korean-made bulletproof vest. A loud sound was heard behind him, and he screamed angrily. A moment later, a magic shield appeared, which surprised the bully. The bandit lowered his eyebrows, shocked that his opponent had a magic tool, and the protagonist realized that he had killed three. Looking away, the youth decided that it was a good idea to bring a bunch of magic tools with him. Lowering his hand, the awakened one asked if everything was finished, and clarified why he brought so many tools, and did not even use half of them. The bandits went down the stairs, not understanding what all the commotion was about and who this guy was. The villains rushed at the protagonist, to which he thought that his long tongue got him into trouble again. A building was visible, from which he could hear the clone of Xianghyun counting the enemies killed. Lowering his hands, the guy did not understand why there were so many. The prototype of the protagonist said that he lost count, and, having pulled the blade out of his body, he realized that he forgot about it while fighting. The protagonist's copy lowered the corners of his mouth and called out to the big guy. Stepping on his head, Heinz asked where the boy he had captured today was, to which the big guy asked if the opponent thought he could get all the information so easily. Pressing his boot on the back of his head, the guy asked if his opponent was an underdog and admitted that he didn't know who was behind him, to which the big guy exclaimed that the young man would regret it. The protagonist's clone lowered the corners of his lips when he heard that the bandit boss would be arriving soon, and when he saw this, it would be the end for him. Opening his mouth, the awakened one thanked the opponent for the information. The rays of the sun fell on the roof of the house, and from it one could hear the clone of Xiangyan saying that the boy should worry about his own life. Opening the door, the silhouette of the man asked if it was Aaron in front of him. Clutching his head, the boy climbed down and asked for mercy. Kneeling down, Heinz asked the boy not to be afraid and said that his sister had asked to save him. A bat flew over the houses, and the boy could be heard asking if the stranger knew his sister, to which he received an answer that he would be given an explanation as soon as they left. The animal knocked on the glass, and the clone of the protagonist suggested that they first get out of here. Suddenly, behind Heinz, the creature began to transform and asked who he was to touch the food in his restaurant. A hand with claws appeared, the owner of which added that he was eating while he was eating. A vampire appeared in front of the guys, who clarified whether he was from an oath of obedience. Putting his hand to his chest, the villain suggested that he could be the brother of this boy, and clarified whether he knew what happens to those who challenge them. Grinning, Heinz said that he was just an outsider who had been robbed by their rabble and had helped the boy by pure chance. The vampire, grinning evilly, exclaimed that it was boring and added that he preferred to eat boys. The monster said that they would die here, and suddenly bloody threads flew towards the boys. The protagonist, taking the boy by the head, ordered him to run. It was visible how the entire room suddenly began to collapse. A moment later, the protagonist fell to the floor with the child. Clenching his jaw, the guy smelled alcohol and wondered if it was a barrel, and also asked Aaron if he was okay and if he was hurt. The clone of the awakened one knelt down and said that this was his chance and that he should run outside, and the villain realized that his opponent had dodged. Spreading his fingers, the vampire exclaimed that he was faster than he thought. Swinging his hand sharply, the opponent added that this was a great warm-up before lunch. The double, opening his mouth wide, shouted at the boy that it didn't matter what happened, and the main thing was not to come back. Heinz, drawing his sword, defended himself from the oncoming attack. Suddenly, the copy noticed the enemy's long claws. The villain, having hit him, left deep scars. The vampire said that the guy had impressive regenerative abilities, and the young man, through the sweat on his face, realized that the difference in strength was too great. The enemy, licking his mouth, explained that this dish was unplanned, but it would become a real delicacy, and the double thought that if he did not want to play, he would have died long ago. Clenching his fist, the main character decided that he could not do nothing. Suddenly, the monster cut off his hand and said that he needed to scrape his bones a little before eating. The bloodsucker lifted the guy in front of him and said that this was the end of his senseless resistance. The villain approached his neck and added that he would pay for this. Suddenly, an unusual artifact appeared in the protagonist's mouth, and he thought that if there was a difference in strength, then they would just have to die. A second later, the body of the protagonist's clone suddenly caught fire. The vampire, with bulging eyes, asked if it was a fiery instrument and whether he had hidden it all this time. Heinz bared his teeth and muttered that when he was thrown to the ground, he saw alcohol spreading across the floor. The clone looked at the small artifact and wondered how he could take advantage of this situation. The double nudged the enemy, to which the latter wondered if he wanted to die with him, and silently said that if the fire touched the ground, the guy would burn alive. The young man abruptly rushed from his place and shouted at the enemy to get out. The monster smiled widely and said that he was a fragile piece of flesh. A moment later, they hit each other with their foreheads. It was seen how the opponent fell to the ground, and the clone of the awakened exclaimed that he himself said that he had a strong body and good regeneration ability. The protagonist opened his jaw and loudly called the vampire a tough delicacy. The villain, bulging his eyes, screamed sharply. A second later, a powerful explosion was heard. It was seen how the building was burning powerfully. Xianghyun, lying on the floor, said that this impressed him. Opening his mouth, the protagonist said that he survived and realized that being strong is also hard. A moment later, the protagonist thoughtfully narrowed his eyes. A bright fire burned above his head. Diana appeared with her brother, and the guy thought that the mission to save the unlucky girl was successful. The townswoman, looking at the strong flame, loudly called her uncle, and the system reported that the avatar Heinz had died and would be reborn in 7 days. After some time, a girl was seen polishing a man's shoes, to which he exclaimed that it was enough. The gentleman closed his eyes and asked her to put the money on the table, to which she thanked him. Diana scratched her forehead, and the guy behind her asked if he could ask her. The townswoman smiled widely and politely told him to sit down. Suddenly, her pupils dilated in joy. The girl abruptly hugged the young man, shouting that he was okay. The awakened one stroked her head and explained that he was fine, and asked if he looked like someone who would die easily. Smirking contentedly, Seonghyun told himself that all this was not true, because this time the avatar really did die. In the daytime, the protagonist's house appeared, and he said that he would be reborn only in a week, so Diana would be nervous. Stretching out his palm, the protagonist wondered if he should create a new avatar. Suddenly, his clone appeared, whom the boy called Heinz II, and the system also wrote down his characteristics. Through the sweat on his face, the awakened one thought that he had rushed to use the avatar, and wondered if she would notice that he was different. The townswoman happily hugged the young man, and he said to himself that she was sure that it was him. Seonghyun, hugging Diana, muttered that it was because they had the same soul. The guide widened her eyes and exclaimed that he could no longer come here because the vampires would look for him. The protagonist opened his jaw and told her not to worry, he had already decided everything. A small house was visible in the evening, and the protagonist explained that he had the immortal king hands on his side, so vampires were no longer a problem. The awakened one poked at the screen and said that he would have to wait 10 days for the interdimensional transmission to complete. The guy smiled and added that it would take longer than he thought. Suddenly, Vurek grabbed him by the neck. Squeezing the boy tighter, the Lord clarified whether he had done it. The monster said that the tracks from the forest led to him, to which Seonghyun did not understand anything, thinking that they had already figured everything out. The man raised his eyebrows and asked if the outsider was under the jurisdiction of their slain vampire. The protagonist, through sweat on his face, muttered that he was being strangled, but could not gather the strength to fight back. Vurek left a scar on him and said that he did not feel the aura of dark magic and did not smell the blood of his king. The protagonist, closing one eye, asked what he was talking about because he did not understand him, and added that he was just sleeping. The Lord bared his fangs and clarified whether he really did not understand. Suddenly, the monster bit into the guy's neck and loudly repeated his question. The evil spirit licked his mouth and explained that he would ask again then, but slowly. The man added that he could not lie, and the awakened one, spreading his fingers in pain, thought that this was madness. It seemed like his body suddenly turned red, and the young man wondered why this was happening to him again, and the system reported that his entity type had changed to a vampire. The Lord clenched his fists menacingly, and the artificial intelligence wrote that Seonghyun received a special skill of the inheritance of small blood and also the super regeneration skill changed to regeneration. Vurek's eyes glowed with a dark aura and he asked if he really had nothing to do with the vow of disobedience, and the protagonist muttered that this pressure became like power. It was visible how his heart was pounding loudly, and the protagonist thought that his blood was screaming that he should submit to the higher vampire, and also exclaimed to the Lord that he was just a simple traveler. Smiling, the guy said to himself that he could ignore it. Drops of blood appeared, and the young man explained that the center of the mind acts as a filter that blocks the instinct of submission in his blood. The vampire, looking back, realized that he was mistaken and ordered the young man to follow him because they had something to do. Awakened, through sweat on his face, decided that he would go and find out some information. After some time, the main office of the Ascension branch appeared. The monsters, bowing, exclaimed to the Lord that they had not seen each other for a long time. The vampires looked at Seonghyun and wondered if this was new blood and why Vurek had accepted this scum. Suddenly, the girl hugged the protagonist and greeted him, and was also surprised that the minor blood had appeared after a long time. She, smiling widely, said her name and asked what his name was, to which the protagonist wondered who she was. Heinz, raising his hand, introduced himself to her, and Rossalicia asked him not to be so rude because they were of the same minor blood. The vampire, giving her glass, exclaimed that he should drink freshly squeezed blood, and the clone thought that perhaps he needed to drink to avoid suspicion. A moment later, the double took a sip. Suddenly, his veins swelled, and he realized that even through the filter of his mind he felt a strong thirst. The copy, closing his eyes, muttered that it was dangerous to just drink, so he would block the taste and smell, and then drink. Wiping his mouth, the guy said that it was delicious. Rossalicia touched his face and told him that he was his type, and if he were a human, she would suck out his blood to the last drop, to which the young man asked why she called him a small blood. The girl opened her mouth and asked if he knew anything about vampire ranks. The fresco depicted a group of vampires, and Rossalicia said that it was like a night among humans. Pure blood participants appeared, who were aristocrats like Lord Vurek. An image of the king of true blood appeared, and the girl explained that there was also sacred blood in the likeness of a god. The vampire folded her hands, and they asked her about a god, to which she replied that it was their prophet and the one they must completely obey. Suddenly, the leader tapped his glass and asked everyone to pay attention. The monster, raising the corners of his lips, said that it seemed that everyone had gathered, so they could get down to business. The man said that the fragments of the immortal king had disappeared, and Parita, a pure-blooded vampire, was seen fixing her hair. The Lord said that it was confirmed that they were last transported to the city, But at some point they disappeared without a trace, and there was a possibility that they had entered the city, causing Teopal to lower his eyebrows. Heinz looked up and asked if they were fragments of the immortal king, and Rossalicia asked if he knew about them. The clone of the protagonist, hearing that dark mages in one village were cultivating fragments of the immortal king, narrowed his pupils and wondered where the guys from the Oath of Defiance were, and Burak added that from today on, everyone would thoroughly examine the areas allocated to them. After some time, the girl walked between home and said that if she walked during the day, her skin would burn. The protagonist, covering his face with his hood, said that exposure to sunlight weakens him, to which the vampire exclaimed that even the pureblood lady Parita went looking for them, and they can't just sit around doing nothing. Opening her jaw, Rossalicia said that it was surprising that the fragments had disappeared, and that moving their fragments here was a waste of effort. The boy, holding out his palm, asked if she had fragments of the immortal king. The girl closed her eyes and replied that the black mages said that they once cultivated the fragments, and thought that they would merge them with their fragments. Clenching his fist, the youth muttered that it was a series of luck, because now one of the purebloods is guarding the fragments. The doppelganger of the awakened one, taking hold of the vampire, clarified if she knew the location of the fragments. Smiling widely, she asked if someone like her could know that. Suddenly, Diana appeared, exclaiming that she thought she knew it. Heinz, raising his eyebrows, asked her again, to which he received the answer that she knew where the fragments of the immortal king were. A small house was visible at night and a question was heard asking if she knew where the magical artifacts were. The girl, sitting at the table, said that she was not sure because so much time had passed. Licking a spoon, Diana added that about a year ago she kept the tomb clean. She remembered holding a broom and said that every Friday, members of the Varkalak Guild came there and they visited the stone chamber. A dark gate appeared, and the townswoman continued that every time there was a foul odor inside the chamber. The boy, holding his chin, thought that this was worth investigating, and the younger brother exclaimed that this was why she said not to go near the tomb. Abruptly getting up from the table, the protagonist thanked him for the interesting information and said that he would investigate himself and that they should keep their heads down. Suddenly, Diana grabbed her uncle's hand. With wide eyes, she said that he seemed to smell different. The copy of the awakened one, opening her jaw, replied that she had a good sense of smell and added that it just happened. Seonghyun explained that it would not affect her, so she should not worry, which made the girl open her mouth wide. Through sweat on her face, the townswoman asked what if it became more difficult. Suddenly, Diana stretched out her hand and shouted that it was okay and let him drink some of her blood. Her body shook, and the townsman asked him not to drink too much. The protagonist hit her on the head and asked her to calm down. Clenching his fist, the protagonist told her to just tell him where that place was. After a while, coffins appeared and loud laughter was heard. A stone staircase was visible and someone ordered to stand at attention. The vampire, looking at the young guy, asked if he wanted to die. Teopal, raising his finger, said that he had one try, and if he attacked even once, he would send him back. The young man, holding the sword, was very scared. A moment later, he screamed loudly and swung the weapon. The monster, clenching his fist, said that this was very harsh. Suddenly, the body of his subordinate was surrounded by magical threads. The guy could not stand on his feet and began to fall. It was visible how dark energy was sucked into his face. Suddenly, his skin color changed, causing him to scream. It seemed like the young man was suspended by magical threads, and Teopal said that he was very bored. Looking at his ward, the vampire ordered him to clean up the trash and bring someone stronger for the next sacrifice. The monster, grabbing the young man, obeyed the order. The monster opened its mouth and asked if there was anyone here. Suddenly, many skeletons rushed towards him. With his arms outstretched, the Lord did not understand how they got here. Menacingly baring his teeth, he ordered his servants to get rid of the terrible skeletons. It was visible how the evil spirits quickly moved their legs. Suddenly, magical spikes appeared, which quickly rose up. Teopal clenched his jaw and asked who he was and whether he was a necromancer from the Oath of Disobedience. Lowering his hands, the vampire asked how he knew about this place. Hans's eyes glowed with a dark flame. The guy, looking at the skeletons, said that he did not want to tell in a good way, but he did not care. Frowning angrily, the monster exclaimed that he would ask questions to his severed head. The Lord powerfully demolished the opponents in his path. It was visible how the bodies of the evil spirits were divided into several parts. The clone of the protagonist, clenching his fist, wondered if only his head would remain. Suddenly, an unusual aura swirled around the monsters. The copy of the protagonist, opening his jaw, thought that they would still have a look. His limbs appeared, and he added that he should try. Many sharp blades flew towards Teopal. Looking down, the vampire thought that the spell was too fast and it was impossible to dodge it. Suddenly, the leg of the guy who warned the Lord of the danger appeared. A moment later, Heinz hit the sharp fragments with his hand, and the monster wondered if they were reinforcements. The Lord smiled and said that he was in time, and also clarified whether he reported an ambush, to which he received a positive answer. It was seen how the skeletons were fighting the vampires, and the clone of the protagonist explained that Vurek's followers had gathered outside and came first to help him. Teopal frowned and asked for help, adding that the enemy was very strong. The veins on his face bulged, and he exclaimed that they needed to buy time for reinforcements to arrive. Suddenly, the protagonist bit into his shoulder, which made the vampire not understand what was happening and why there was blood on him. The Lord, looking back, asked the boy if he had gone crazy. Suddenly, a magic chain surrounded his hand. The monster raised his palms and said that this was dark magic. Through the sweat on his face, the Lord was very surprised that the skeleton and Heinz were in cahoots and also asked one of them to stop. Opening his mouth wide, Teopal shouted that drinking the blood of his kind is a grave sin that clouds the mind. A moment later, the color of his skin changed and he screamed loudly. The devil, wiping his mouth, replied that it would not work on him, and the system reported that the personality had inherited the blood magic skill. The young man, lowering his eyebrows, said that with his new ability he would be able to break the blood barrier. Hans, looking at his partner, objected that there was not enough time. The guy pointed his finger down and said that in that case he would break him. A second later, there was a powerful explosion. The protagonist's clones looked into the hole and exclaimed that they had found what they were looking for. The second fragment of the immortal king appeared. The skeleton quickly reached for it. Suddenly, there was a powerful surge of dark energy, and Hans said that this was an amazing idea. Holding the artifact in her hand, the copy of the protagonist thought that even if she filtered out negative thoughts with the center of the mind, there would still be too many of them in the fragment. 3 clones appeared, their eyes suddenly lit up, and the monster asked them to focus on Hans. Powerful dark energy was visible in the sky. Vurek raised his head and noticed the fog, and wondered if he was too late. A moment later, the silhouette of a skeleton swirled in the sky. The Lord, stretching out his palm, ordered everyone to shoot. Magic bullets hit the protagonist. The protagonist put his hand on the mana stone. Suddenly, one of the vampires was torn apart from the inside. The man, through the sweat on his face, recognized the silhouette in front of him. The magic artifact glowed brightly, and the system reported that the regeneration skill had evolved into a special immortality skill, and the awakened one had inherited a special forbidden knowledge skill. Hans, holding out his index finger, released dark magic from it. The knights looked up, trying to understand what kind of smoke was rising from behind the walls. The guy standing on the ground assumed that this flame was coming from Ascent. He put his fist to his mouth and began to cough. Catching some substance in his hand, the paladin ordered his subordinate to turn the horses around, because they were returning in themselves to report on what had happened. Raising his head, the man explained that this ash was not ordinary at all. Some creature was hovering in the air, and the paladin said that this ash was a sign of the immortal king's rebirth. Standing behind, the vampire realized that he had become tens of times stronger. An archlich named Hans appeared in front of them. The lich raised his hand, in which some energy was gathering. A staff appeared from his hand. This was possible due to the absolute understanding of dark magic and knowledge of all secrets. Hans put it in front of him. A fog began to cover the vampires. Opening his mouth, the Lord could not understand what their enemy was planning, when suddenly his assistant called out to him. Putting his hand on his chest, the vampire explained that first of all they should get out of here, but suddenly he was interrupted. Something dragged her into the fog. Some black substance was approaching Vurek. It pierced his body. The lich, appearing in front of him, noted that he was definitely stronger than other purebreds. Coming closer, the skeleton also added that he was now nothing more than a bag of blood. The Lord asked if the archlich had completely absorbed the fragment, since his magical power was incredibly huge. The vampire frowned as he asked how he could endure so much darkness alone, and suddenly the assistant behind him asked if he was really interested in knowing. He said with his mouth open that the archlich had not worked alone. The Lord's body fell to the ground. Heinz smiled as he received a notification from the system that his special ability had been inherited by the pure blood. Wiping away the blood, the avatar realized that he had finally become a pure blood, and also realized that by devouring vampires, he could grow faster, so they would all be eaten. The vampire, coming out of the forest, asked Lady Parita what they should do now. Rossalicia, crying, said that if Parita were here, they would not have given up so easily, while her ally explained that Lord Vurek had been defeated, so their opponent should not be underestimated. Raising her hand, she said that the remaining fragments contained an excessive amount of magic, which meant that the enemy was incredibly strong. Raising her head, the vampire noted that the sun was already rising. They should quickly return to the base to request reinforcements. The man ran through the city, breathing heavily. Suddenly, he stopped. Jeffy, leaning against the wall, hoped that his pursuers would not run after him until the end, also thinking that these vampires were all stupid because they behaved so arrogantly. but were destroyed in an instant. Suddenly, someone grabbed his hand while the man was talking about how it was a mistake to trust these creatures. Rooftops of houses were visible and the scream of this man was heard, all because Hans remained in the city to deal with the remains of Varkalak. Heinz was frying something on a fire with people. This was possible because he was able to join a small guild of merchants in order to leave the city with Diana and her brother. Starting to pepper, the vampire explained that after this action, the taste of the dish will be exquisite. Putting food on plates, the avatar said that the special steak is ready. The children thanked him, beaming with happiness, and the boy asked them to eat well. Looking at them, he thought that most likely their faces were glowing like that because the danger was behind them after all. Smiling, the vampire asked the girl if her uncle owned a store in eastern Laplas, and she answered affirmatively. Smiling, she also added that she was not sure if her father would be happy to see her and her brother, but the avatar asked her not to worry about that. Leaning his head on his hand, the vampire understood that if this worked, he would give the children money, although he was even sad to think about parting with them. Smiling, Heinz could no longer remember the last time he felt something like this, because it was already clear that he had changed since he came here. The girl, opening her mouth, called out to the vampire. Raising her hand to her mouth, she asked the boy if he was okay and if he wanted blood. Smiling, the young man explained that he was doing fine, since he had already managed to eat his fill before, and he remembered that he had drunk the blood of all the vampires left in the village. A blue haze rose above some monuments, and someone's order was heard for the subordinate to finish and go inside. Crossing his arms over his chest, Hans explained that this subspace was incredibly convenient and also infinite. Looking somewhere, the Lick realized that forbidden knowledge and evil wisdom were a great combination, since thanks to them it was possible to open a subspace on the ground. Suddenly, a blood attack began to gather above him. An arrow struck the archlich. Over, baring his teeth, asked if the enemy was still resting in their city, because he did not underestimate the other vampires too much. The vampire stood on the roof and asked if he was a member of the cult of the Oath of Disobedience. Standing up, Hans was grateful to the boy for such a great opinion of him and answered affirmatively, introducing himself as an honorary member of the Oath of Disobedience. A bloody arrow appeared in the vampire's hand and he said that it was all a lie, because the refuge of this cult was destroyed, and also asked if Hans had stolen a fragment of the immortal king by chance and then simply ran away. A scythe appeared in his hand after he said that it was all just trifles. Rushing into the attack, the vampire shouted that the Lick would die no matter what. The attack fell right in front of Hans. Looking at the body, the Lick realized that it was too close. Suddenly, his silhouette of the archlich's body began to transform. Looking at the vampire, the avatar understood that a purebred vampire with such power would be a very difficult opponent. The hero's head hit the red barrier. Standing before him, Over asked him if he really thought he would be allowed to escape so easily, since the best blood mages of his clan had set up this barrier. Touching it, the protagonist avatar realized that it was quite possible to break through if he tried, but it would take more time to simply get used to the new power. Releasing two bloody hands to attack, the vampire said that he would smash the enemy's skull and extract a personal fragment from it. Looking ahead, Hans understood that there was only one option left and asked the enemy to remember that he was a member of the Oath of Disobedience. Frowning, he shouted that he was the death of the boy, since now he would be able to retreat, but next time they would definitely meet face to face. Disappearing, the Lick understood that this was an excellent trademark of the villain, which helps him leave truly dramatically. The archlich disappeared immediately after he was recalled. The mages, looking at the empty space, did not understand what had happened and what he had said before disappearing. With his mouth wide open, Over asked how he had managed to get through the barriers. An arrow flew at one of the mages. The vampire was reflected in the tips, saying that these were the holy silver arrows of the paladins. Pointing somewhere with his finger, the mage shouted that they had a huge problem. Knights on horses were galloping towards them, and the mage shouted that this was the order of paladins of the Church of the Supreme God, and also that they had surrounded the tomb and were approaching. Gritting his teeth, the guy mentally cursed the Lick. Clenching his fist, he realized that he had deliberately stayed in the city and delayed them here, but now he definitely needed to find this archlich and kill him. The protagonist's house was visible. Showing a thumb, Xianghan was pleased. Since the avatar survived, the same noted that the ability to recall it really works like a cheat code. Hans shone in the spotlight, saying that he is the embodiment of death and consists of an oath of disobedience. Covering his red face with his hands, the hero screamed. Falling onto the bed, he could not believe that the archlich had such a typical line from the villain's dialogue, because of it he could simply die of shame. Sitting down on the bed again, the guy asked why he even thought of saying such a thing, because this is already the first madness. The protagonist put his hand to his face while Hans said that he is truly proud of his strength. Holding his head in his hands, the Lick said that then he personally dealt with a group of evil vampires and also saved a defenseless girl in the city. Smiling, the young man noted that now he really feels like a hero. Stretching, he also said that he must have already managed to earn some karma. The hero opened the karma store in front of him. His eyes widened in bewilderment. The window said that the guy currently had 700,000 karma points, and Xiangyan said that he had just recently spent them all on upgrading, but they had become too many again. Smiling, the hero suggested that it could have been influenced by the fact that he had enraged the vampires and dark mages. Pressing the upgrade button, the young man decided to upgrade the special skill. Suddenly, a bright light from the system window illuminated him. The notification said that the limit for summoning avatars had increased, and the hero noted that since the number of avatars had increased, then some additional skills should have appeared. Looking at the system message, the guy also noticed that he had acquired a persona skill, a skill similar to the center of reason. The hero lowered his head. The man held several masks in front of him, symbolizing a special skill of the persona, which uses the avatar as a vessel for emotions. Clenching his fist, the protagonist understood that the growth of the special skill was happening in the direction the user needed, since apparently the system itself determined what he needed and most likely he already understood why. Needing children popped into his head. Also battles with many strong enemies. Looking at the avatar, the hero remembered that he had been sitting in his room for 2 years, but the reason why he managed to do all this also existed. Looking at the console, the guy remembered that for him everything that was happening was a game. Lowering his head, the protagonist realized that he was still locked in one room. Looking at the floor, the young man thought about the fact that the reality that he had always avoided was now right in front of his face. Leaning his hand to his chest, the guy began to read the spell for a new special ability to transfer anxiety to monsters. Without turning around, the young man called out to the Lick. Something was flying towards the monster while the hero asked it to transfer these terrible emotions into the vessel. The remnants of negative emotions flew out of it. Looking at his hand, the young man felt lightness and freshness because now he does not feel the complete disappearance of all emotions, but there is a feeling as if they were simply carefully folded into a box. Turning around, the guy was interested in how hands felt, having absorbed them, but he asked the owner not to worry. Clenching his fist, the Lick said that pain and despair were his ubiquitous companions, who simply did not dare to disturb him. With his eyes wide open, the hero remembered that this is exactly what the Lick said, but this cannot continue. Covering his face with his hands, the archlich noted that the avatar, filled with the hero's emotions, now possessed his personality. The hero opened his mouth in surprise when suddenly something thundered. Looking around, the guy assumed that it could be an explosion. Looking out the window, the young man was surprised by the appearance of another villain in the city because things were getting worse every day. Putting his hands on his head, he also added that it should not worry him, since the Guardians were responsible for dealing with this because now it was not happening right in front of him like last time, so it did not concern him. His bare foot stood on the carpet when suddenly the Lick asked if he needed a reason to eradicate evil. The hero held his hands at chest level. The eyes of the vessel turned blue. With his eyes wide open, the protagonist realized that after transferring all the negative emotions to hands, everything became crystal clear, because the habit of avoiding belonged to the young man. Remembering the tragedy, Xiangyan knew that he wanted to defeat evil the most, but it had previously always come up with excuses because he simply did not have enough courage. The Lick, holding the mask, said that the world order was shaken and criminals were now swarming everywhere. Putting on the mask, the vessel said that he would now become their law. Something blue appeared on the roof, while the people on the ground said that this was not the first time. Looking somewhere, the man noted that these bastards began to organize terrorist attacks. His friend asked why they still did not call for reinforcements. Looking at them, the avatar realized that the villains created an organization, but even so, they did not have much time left. 2 eyes appeared above his hands and he knew that he would be ashamed to leave empty-handed. The eye opened. They flew forward, preparing to become the ears and eyes of the archlich. 2 eyes covered in a blue glow, searching for sinners hidden in the shadows. Someone holding a cigarette asked to bring him an ashtray. Holding a schoolboy by the shoulders, the boy said that this was an ashtray man. The eye hung not far from them, while the student with a cigarette said that this schoolboy was the best ashtray of all. A house was visible and screams and pleas were coming from it. A girl was sitting by the wall with her son and asking where they should run. A man, swinging a belt, told her not to lie to him. Someone was hitting the glass with a crowbar. A robber climbed into a store. Raking out the cash register, he decided to leave since he had enough. The Lick's eye lit up blue because he could see absolutely everything, and now he had the opportunity to punish the villains because they were no different from trash. Grabbing the robber by the neck, the vessel decided to punish them with trauma. Grabbing the man by the neck, the Lick knew that it would be a stunning trauma. The avatar grabbed the student by the hand, deciding to instill only fear in their souls. Holding his hand, the monster told him to remember this day, planting the seeds of evil in them. He continued to hold the man by the neck. His hand was also clasped around the robber's neck. The night city was visible and suddenly a scream was heard. Looking somewhere, the archlich realized that he was getting more and more used to the power, but now he needed more. Many eyes appeared behind his back because he had to make a decision to cleanse everything more actively. The eyes flew all over the area because this was what would serve to cleanse the entire city. Raising his hand, the skeleton sighed. There were several knocked out bandits behind him, and the lick said that it was very pleasant to clean out the garbage hidden in the darkness all night. Holding the Eye of Darkness in his hand, the vessel knew that it had proven very useful, but its limitations were also obvious. Under the influence of light, it began to disappear, and the lick realized that he would need a more effective way to detect enemies. Something flew into his head while he was thinking about the fact that he could not release the undead into the city. The birds flew away when the Punisher began to shout that they should be killed and made minions for this. The birds flew away and an idea came to the skeleton's head. Catching the feather, Hans said that this was the same invisible eye that could move freely. Animals living near sorcerers were called familiars. This is the magic of enslavement used by dark magicians to control them. Several birds were sitting on the archlich. Throwing his hands above his head, the skeleton screamed that nothing was working for him. Putting his hands on the table, the Punisher of criminals noted that it would be great if the animal looked normal, but was infectious, but if the amount of magical power was reduced to simplify the appearance, its ability to infect would suffer. Looking at the cage, the lick realized why programmers gritted their teeth in debugging and suddenly came up with infectious magic of enslavement, a revision of the final version. The animal inside was covered in a blue glow, and the skeleton already wanted to know if he had succeeded. The cat in the cage turned into a mutant with many eyes. She ran away, which meant that there was no result, which had been going on for 3 weeks. Looking at the pigeon, the lick wondered if this was the last test subject, hoping that at least this time he would succeed. Holding the bird in his hands, he asked it to freeze for at least a second and immediately began to regulate the amount of magical power. Blue fog began to flow from his mouth. It was an infectious enslavement magic, a revision of the now definitely final version. Looking at the bird, the Punisher understood that he was finished. Suddenly, the bird flew away. Covered in blue fog, the pigeon looked quite normal, but it was still necessary to check its ability to infect. The bird landed with the other two. The 3 of them were pecking at something on the ground. Suddenly, all 3 birds also became covered in such a glow, which meant success. The lick's eyes turned red because he knew that now the infected objects would become his ears and eyes. The skeleton held his hand out in front of him and ordered them to fly and look for enemies. The man, leaning over the ground, was examining something. An image of the archlich appeared in his head, saying that he was a member of the Oath of Disobedience, as well as the death of a certain person. Tuscan, coming closer, called out to the archbishop. Frowning, the paladin explained that after interrogating the rest, they took prisoners, but apparently the vampires are not allies of the descendants of the immortal king. Looking up, Latius said that in any case, they needed more evidence, since while they were doing this useless work, the immortal king was gaining power. The cross on his neck began to swing. Folding his arms, he asked if someone had blocked it, to which an affirmative answer followed. A certain priestess, standing in front of the statue, said that the presence of the immortal king was noticed and that he was in a cave in the mountains to the northwest of this place. Bowing his head, the archbishop thanked her and noted that he would definitely live up to her expectations. A small cave was visible. Sitting in the lotus position, the lick knew that he had already set his familiars to send information when encountering monsters, and it remained to check whether that information would be received correctly. Suddenly, his eyes glowed brighter than usual. Looking from the face of some animal, the skeleton realized that the ground familiars were acting extremely strangely, trying to escape somewhere. The mouse was running away, and the lick assumed that they could be scared, but if they had discovered a monster, they should have reported, but suddenly one thought came to his mind. The mouse was running away from people, and the Punisher also immediately realized this. Jumping up, he could not understand what people were doing in a remote area. After all, was this really an ambush? Many paladins stood in front of the cave entrance, but the archlich could not understand how so many people could remain unnoticed and hide their aura. Suddenly, an arrow pierced the dove's body. The paladin, standing in front of the cave, said that Hans's tricks would no longer work on them. Taking up his sword, the knight said that no evil could escape the sign of the saint, and therefore the monster would not escape them. Unsheathing his blade, the paladin told him to surrender and no divine justice. Noticing the cross on the soldier's armor, the lick realized that these were holy knights because he remembered this emblem from his training in Brockislack. Raising his hands, the skeleton knew that divine power was opposed to dark magic, so it would not be easy to deal with it, and asked them how they were able to find it. The paladin struck the enemy. Falling to his knees, the lick cried out, and Tuscan explained that he had not given him the right to speak. Holding his blade in front of him, the knight told him not to even think that he could deceive him with his words. Placing his hand on his chest, the lick noted that he was indeed stubborn. Holding his hand in front of him, the skeleton decided to pretend to attack and simply run away. Raising his hand, the knight called it a cheap trick. His hand glowed brightly as he spoke about how he could not deceive the servants of the saint. The paladin pierced the Lick's body with his sword. Lowering his head, Hans asked him if he really believed that punishing evil was a crime, but Tuscan told him to shut up because everything still began from the moment he learned the forbidden magic. Swinging his fist, the knight shouted that the enemy had become one of them. Looking at him, the avatar asked where the logic could be. Suddenly he looked down at his hand. The vessel realized, as it took a blow to the skull, that it was all because of the recent interference with its magic. Waves of holy energy were emanating from the cave. The Lick flew out of the cave and suddenly someone shouted that they needed to sing a hymn. The priests raised their hands and began to chant. Covering their ears, the skeleton realized that this song was draining his strength. Clenching his hand into a fist, he realized that he could simply kill them and shut them up, but he could not harm innocent people. Someone appeared behind him and addressed the singers. The paladin pierced the monster with a blade. With wide eyes, he shouted that this was their chance. The Lick opened his eyes wide. With 2 fingers extended, the people began to chant. A chain pierced the skeleton's hand. In an instant, his entire body was covered in them, which only meant that the archlich was overly careless. Once in the air, Hans realized how much danger he was in, unable to move or use magic. The paladin brought the blade to the skull. The people continued to chant and the avatar knew that such chains would not let him escape. Looking at the paladin, the skeleton noted that he had tried hard to catch him, but the same said that everything happened as expected. Looking at the monster, Tuscan explained that no evil had ever escaped from the chains and also asked him if he would resist anymore. The man's mouth fell open in surprise when the prisoner began to laugh. Looking down, the Lick said that in this situation, they would not be able to come to an agreement. Covering himself in a purple aura, he said that at this point they would part ways and the paladin should try to catch him if he could. Lightning began to form in the knight's hand while he said that he did not know what the skeleton could have planned. The arrow flew towards the Lick while Tuscan shouted that he would not just stand there. Looking at the approaching arrow, the archlich realized the futility of his efforts because the strength of these chains did not even matter. Hans disappeared from the shackles. Opening his mouth, the man said that he broke free and added that this could not be at all. The city in which the protagonist lived was visible. Lying on the bed, Sonja noted that this was becoming a problem after all. Closing his eyes, the hero realized that he already had too many enemies, because where should he go, there would be chaos everywhere. He remembered the Shadow faction. Memories of the Varkalak vampire clan also popped into his head. He also remembered that very huge force of the continent called the Order of Paladins. The guy widened his eyes and thought of something. Opening the karma store, the young man realized what was the reason why he managed to earn karma to this day. His eyes widened. After imagining the archlich, the hero realized that the karma was being accrued because the young man was attracting villains from all over the continent. Clenching his hand into a fist, the protagonist said that he would think about it later, since it was best to focus on the original plan now. The archlich already had a mask on. The skeleton sat in front of several cats, realizing that it was time to reap the fruits of his research. Looking at the cats, Hans knew that the principle was quite simple because the controlled entity itself would spread black magic. The cat's eyes turned red, meaning that the Punisher's eyes would be everywhere. His eyes glowed bright red, because now he could easily cover a place like Seoul. Suddenly, the skeleton noticed something. The cat stopped somewhere because she found something. She was sitting in front of some windows, which meant the first signal. A window was visible and from it came pleas for mercy. The girl, stretching out her hand, said that she would do anything if only he would let her go. Suddenly, she noticed someone from above. The girl grabbed the bars and began to call the person passing by her. Looking at the leaving young man, she did not understand where he was going and why he did not hear her. The maniac pulled her hair, saying that it was useless. Bringing a knife to her throat, he said that she could scream as much as she wanted because it didn't matter how loud the scream would be. Looking at the windows, through the animal's eyes, the skeleton heard the maniac's words that thanks to his ability, no one sees them and no one hears her screams and suffering. Putting her down on the floor, the killer ordered her to scream louder because she had such a sweet voice. Swinging a knife, he said that she would be among the top 3 from his collection. Suddenly, something broke through the ceiling in the room. Turning around, the maniac did not understand what was happening, while the Lick began to talk about his ability. Standing in front of him, Hans asked if his skill was based on sound suppression and invisibility. One eye of the Punisher shone while he said that this skill does not work for him, so the heinous deeds of the maniac will end today. Grabbing the girl by the neck, the killer asked who he was he really the keeper, and also asked how he got there. Bringing the knife to the victim's neck, the man warned him, saying that he would kill her if he came closer, but the skeleton did not believe him. Holding the girl in his arms, the Lick asked him what he would do now. The maniac realized that the creature in front of him was a returnee. Frowning, the maniac killer asked how he dared to steal his prey, because now they would both die. The man rushed to attack with a knife. Suddenly, something grabbed his hand. Hands, standing in front of him, noted that judging by the conversations, this girl was not his first victim. Touching the forehead of this man, the Punisher decided to test his guesses. Pressing his finger on the forehead, the skeleton used the Cry of the Dead, one of the abilities of necromancy. The Lick had memories of him killing others and noted that he really was a serial killer, so there was no point in watching further. Pressing the maniac's skull, Hand said that he was sentenced to death. Blood spurted from the killer's head. Looking at him, the skeleton noted that even death was merciful to him. Blood flowed onto the floor and the necromancer's words were heard that he needed undead in any case, which he would command on earth, and asked the corpse if it was worth turning him to. Raising his hand, the Punisher began to talk about the fact that this is a harsh method that involves sucking blood from the body, because unexpectedly this is more like learning this skill. In front of him stood a pumped up undead named Ghast. Snapping his fingers, the skeleton told him to enter the portal and added that he would need it later. Looking at the girl, the Lick decided to clean up before leaving, calling 119. The police were already standing in front of this house. Inside, Hanchel, the leader of the criminal investigation team, was already there. The police officer who approached him said that they had confirmed the footage from the scene because it looked like it was the serial killer they couldn't catch. Looking at him, the leader asked if the one who killed the serial killer was a returnee, to which he answered in the affirmative and explained that they couldn't find the body, but they found a huge amount of dark magic and traces of blood. Taking out a lollipop, the leader asked if his colleague was joking after he said that at least the person worthy of death was killed and the case was a complete nightmare. Pointing to some drawings on the wall, Hanchel said that drinking power and playing the hero is exactly what it looks like, and such people are dangerous in themselves. The Lick's eyes were closed. Hand stood on the building where the murder took place while the investigator asked about who this lunatic could even be. The skeleton was petting the animal while the leader was talking about wanting to see the man's face at least once. The association that was returning South Korean citizens was visible. The girl, entering the office, explained that she was only there for a minute. Holding her head, she asked Jiun to finally wake up. The guy opened his eyes after saying that this was an important matter and that she should get ready. Raising her hand, she asked what time it was and what had happened, and her colleague explained that the Special Capabilities Bureau had sent them a request for cooperation. Taking the document in his hand, the young man asked if the case was related to the arrest of 3 jewelry thieves or if this case was related to the recent murder. Putting her hand to her chin, the employee read about a dark mage who wore a long coat and a mask. Putting the folder on her face, the worker said that the public safety situation was complicated because they were sending reinforcements, and he was about to hand it over to that guy, and the colleague exclaimed that that bastard was a murderer and she shouldn't have handed it over like that. Jian opened his mouth and explained that the man was capable and if they could tame him, he would make a great dog. Putting his hands on his hips, the colleague asked if he could join them as a guardian, despite the fact that the colleague was really busy with work. Pointing at something on the table, she ordered him to stop talking nonsense and get back to work. Scattering the documents, the guy shouted that he wanted to tear all the damn villains to pieces. Stretching, the hero noted that destroying villains brings him pleasure. Remembering one of the exterminations, the protagonist knew that if these were not serial killers, then they should stop at the saturation of the terror curse and the corresponding punishment. Putting his hand on his hip, Seonghyun said that it seemed that soon he would have to look at the organization of villains that was creating chaos. Children were running around the house while the guy decided to do some other things, since everything was more or less decided here, because maybe he should pay attention to the other world. Crying, the man called out the names of his children. He hugged them, saying that they had been through so much and worked so hard. Looking at them, the hero was glad that the uncle of these children turned out to be a good person. Grinning, the vampire realized that if he had behaved somehow suspiciously, then perhaps he would have had to resort to some threats. Shaking the guy's hand, the man thanked him for bringing the children here. The same one said that there was nothing wrong with that because he did what he had to. The girl, looking at the vampire, began to say something about the last time spent with him. Hugging the young man, she thanked him. Smiling, Hines explained that they were not parting forever, so the guy would visit them often and also ask the children to behave well. Crying, Diana said that she was a little worried because it seemed to her that the young man was changing a lot, but she was also calmed by the fact that she knew that he was a good person. Pointing his finger at himself, the vampire asked if this really happened, also suggesting that it could be due to the influence of the persona. Introducing his 2 avatars, the hero knew that Hans was a mixture of negative emotions and that the Lick wanted to gain recognition. In other words, he was trying to attract attention, while Hines II was focused on intrigue and lies, so he got a calm and stable character. The girl, still hugging the boy, asked him where he was going, but the boy hesitated with an answer. Looking up, he said that he would take the opportunity to go on a pilgrimage. The capital of the kingdom of Talia, called Teleria, was visible. The vampire walked through the capital, realizing that the pilgrimage was the only reason he had to come here. Looking around, he knew that Teleria headed the Church of the Goddess and was home to the largest temple in this land. Looking up, the guy assumed that no one should notice him here. Covered in a blue glow, the hero began to change his avatar to the fourth avatar. Heinrich appeared. The power of this vessel was increased thanks to a unique feature called the spirit of a warrior. The vampire, holding out a bag, said that he did not really want to walk in such a form in the holy city, so the avatar should take this and go to the light. Someone sitting at the counter said that the next believer could come forward. A bag of gold fell on the table in front of the old man. Looking at the riches, the elder asked how much money there was, and the boy explained that it was all his fortune. Putting his hand on his chest, the young man said that he wanted to dedicate everything to the goddess and become a paladin to use her will. Remembering his other avatars, the hero remembered that they were either undead, or a dark mage, or a vampire. They were all children of vile darkness. Grinning, he knew that now his avatar would be a paladin respected by everyone. Slamming his fist on the table, the man agreed. Smiling, Marco said that this man was very sincere. The old man, wide-eyed, asked his colleague to wait, because it did not matter how much he donated, since they could not just enroll an unknown person as a paladin. Smiling, the man said that he should not worry. Looking at the boy, he explained that villains inevitably reveal their true nature during training, and also asked if the recruit would have the courage to show them his true nature. Smiling, Heilig answered affirmatively. Gritting his teeth, the boy asked for water. Standing in front of the huge ball, he could not understand what kind of madness was happening here. The recruit grabbed the huge ball. Holding it above himself, the hero realized that exactly a month had passed since this damn training began, because initially he hoped that the Order of Paladins was noble and cool. There were many such recruits in the hall, and the protagonist realized that this was just a group of macho perverts. Holding the ball, the future paladin growled. The instructor, approaching one of the recruits, said that he was losing concentration, because did he really forget that you can never stop praying during training? The man opened his mouth and shouted that he needed to concentrate and pray again, and the recruit agreed with the order. He opened his mouth wide and began to pray, but the leader shouted that he needed many times more concentration. The student's hands were already shaking, while the instructor shouted that he should pray and restore his weak body. The recruit was able to lift the ball, still praying. Wiping sweat from his face, the hero knew that in emergency situations, repeated prayers strengthened faith and increased divine power, which was actually an effective method. The recruits were beating someone on the back with flails, while this person was saying that his back felt great today and asked to hit even harder. Someone was squeezing the spiky ball with his biceps. The protagonist's eyes turned white from not understanding that they really needed to train in such a perverted form. The instructor, standing above, noted that the recruit Marco had brought was no simpleton. Looking at his upper body, the leader explained that he could lift such a huge weight even before the baptism, and his shoulders and lower body had become unrecognizably strong. Looking at his lower body, the instructor added that he could not wait to see what the baptism would do to him. Squinting, the hero could not understand why they were drooling over his body, because it was terribly uncomfortable, and he did not want to attract attention in this perverted group. With his mouth slightly open, the young man was breathing heavily. Holding the spiky ball in his hand, he realized that 3 months had already passed since the training began, and if he did not have the spirit of a warrior and the skill of super regeneration, he would have been knocked out long ago. Wiping the sweat off his face, Halen realized that his body and stamina had indeed improved, but there was still one problem. Someone put a hand on his shoulder and called out to him, noting that he had apparently finished his lower body workout. Marco, standing in front of him, asked him what he thought about doing some chest exercises together. The instructor, posing, explained that on such a beautiful day they should do a good back workout, because wouldn't the boy agree? The hero, looking at them, shuddered, realizing how perverted they were and also muscular. A church was visible. Rubbing his neck, the guy said that he was already going crazy, because not a day had passed that they didn't invite him to join them for training. And his partner explained that this was most likely happening because the elders had high expectations of him. The crowd, standing not far from them, said that someone was already coming. Archbishop Latius and Sir Tuscan were walking towards the church. The companion, open-mouthed in surprise, noted that it was said that they had gone on an expedition with the paladins and crusaders, and asked when they had returned, and the hero recognized one of them. Remembering the situation with the archlich, the young man assumed that it was this paladin who had poked his sword at Hans and that they had apparently gone on an expedition and had only recently returned. Looking at Tuscan, the protagonist assumed that they had been looking for the lick all this time. Standing in front of the statue, the priest said that the recruits had gathered here today so that the best of them could undergo the baptism ceremony. Unfolding the paper, the old man explained that the ceremony was taking place earlier than usual, since the reason for the postponement was due to special circumstances and the church hoped for the recruits' understanding. Looking at the paper, the priest explained that the recruits who heard their names called would have to step forward. His partner turned to the hero and asked him why the church was holding an event that usually happened once every 6 months, but Heinrich could only speculate on the matter. Remembering Hans, he realized that the paladins were in desperate need of reinforcements to pursue the heir to the immortal king. Clenching his fist, the boy knew that in any case, this would be an ideal opportunity to save time because it might be a great chance to test something. Introducing 4 personas, the young man came up with a new use for the persona and mind center skills. Raising his hand, the priest called out the name of the first recruit. The recruit, kneeling, answered affirmatively to the priest's question about whether he was ready to dedicate his entire life to the god and live it as a paladin. A blue aura began to rise from the guy's entire body, because those who accept baptism transfer all their mana to the deity, and after that it becomes impossible to use magic. In response, the deity gives a blessing and endows with enormous sacred power. The blue sphere rose into the air. The hero knew that everyone receives a blessing of varying strength, because there is one main factor that determines this. Looking at the bright blue cloud of mana, the guy remembered that such a factor is faith in the deity. Golden light illuminated the head of the recruit and the head of the statue. This factor meant that the purer and truer the faith, the freer it is from lies and doubts, the stronger the paladin becomes. Extending his hand, the priest called the name of the protagonist. Smiling, the young man was surprised that the idea of becoming a sacred warrior even occurred to him. Imagining a certain barrier, the hero remembered that until that day he used the center of the mind only to suppress external irritants or to restrain emotions. Bowing his head, he realized that it was possible to use this skill in a completely opposite way. A mask of one of the persons appeared behind him, thanks to which he would be able to create the semblance of Heinrich's beliefs. Covering himself in a blue aura, the guy remembered that the next step would come after extracting all of his mana. A certain black sphere appeared, and the hero knew that after that, he would use the center of his mind to filter out the mistrust and doubt from all of his mana. Looking at the sphere, he thought that his mana would become pure and without a trace of doubt, only pure faith and mana. 3 avatars saturated his current energy to fully absorb the blessing to its maximum potential. Opening his eyes wider, he knew that he would concentrate all of his avatar's spiritual power into the current vessel. The priest, covering his face with his hand, was surprised by such an amount of sacred power. A bright light illuminated the holy church. The recruits, looking up, could not believe what they saw. The sacred power emanating from the protagonist reached the head of the deity statue. The priest placed his hand on his shoulder. Holding out his hands, the old man noted that although he had only just been baptized, he was already at such a level, since his rank was almost equal to that of a priest, and such faith was truly impressive. Smiling, he asked the guy to continue working hard, and the latter thanked the elder. System notifications about receiving the sacred baptism skill appeared, allowing him to distribute spiritual power between avatars more effectively. Looking at his hand, the hero realized that this was his current limit, although even so it was a relief, since it was unlikely that a fake faith built on illusions would work at all. Grinning, he realized that the skill seemed to have not worked at full strength. Imagining the cross of the deity, the guy thought about the fact that the divine being of the church is closer to the system than a personal god is to an individual. Standing under the statue's hand, the protagonist remembered that he had previously opened his mind, which required him to express the confusion he felt regarding human emotions. Looking at the statue, the young man realized that in that case it would be something more like curiosity. Grinning, he now knew what it meant to spy, because such power should only be used for good. A certain window was visible and someone's upset words were heard. Standing over the table, the archbishop explained that in recent months they had not been able to find a single trace of the heir to the immortal king, because he now had nothing to show the deity. Raising his head, Tuscan noted that it seemed to him that further support from the kingdom of Talia was becoming difficult, since it could probably be due to an organization of vampires hidden within the kingdom. Touching a certain figure of the squad, Latius said that during their last pursuit of Hans, there were misunderstandings with the vampire clan and the Oath of Disobedience. Picking up a chip, the old man explained that since the assassination squad had not achieved any results, the political pressure from Talia would only continue to grow. Covering his face with his hand, the bishop explained that a squad of assassins would be deployed throughout the city. As the knight walked out the door, he realized that they were surrounded on all sides and that the paladins would not be enough. Staring at some windows, the paladin tried to figure out what to do. Suddenly, his mouth opened wider in surprise. Looking down, he assumed that these were the newly appointed Fighters of Light. Gritting his teeth, the guy tried to pull out the spear. The weapon struck the protagonist's body. An elbow strike hit the opponent's face. The fighter fell to the ground and a cry was heard that Heinrich had won. Suddenly, 2 system notifications appeared, stating that the avatar had achieved enlightenment through repeated training. The wound on the protagonist's body was healing thanks to super regeneration. The cut was almost completely healed. Helping his friend to get up, he asked if he had intentionally allowed himself to be hit. The hero explained that the battle was worth it because this was his tactic after all. Bowing his head, the boy understood that this power was still not enough, and for further growth he needed new changes. Looking around, the young man listened to the commander's words that his sacred power was already at the level of a trainer or a high-ranking paladin. Approaching him, Tuscan noted that he was still not experienced enough to become a paladin. Looking at the boy, the man said that he probably felt more than the others. Frowning, the leader also said that he was ready to make him stronger and invited him to the Temple of Roselia. Standing in front of him, the protagonist asked again, not believing the words of the interlocutor. The same one simply repeated his words and asked if there was any problem with this. Extending his hand to him, Heinrich answered negatively and said that he definitely wanted to go with him. Then the leader of the paladins told him to follow him, since they were leaving right now. Catching up with him, the young man asked if the commander could give him some time to collect things, but he told him to entrust this to someone else. Stepping into the portal, Tuscan noted that it was probably unexpected, but everything would be explained in detail on the spot. Looking at him, the guy replied that he understood everything. They appeared near the famous Great Temple. Looking around, the hero realized that this was the largest sanctuary of the church, located in the very center of the continent. Inside, they worshipped the status, while the young man thought that this was the very place where both the Pope and the goddess resided, that is, the heart of the church itself. Ristar, folding her hands, greeted the guests and noted that they were most likely tired from a long journey. Bowing, the chief paladin thanked her, while the hero still could not believe that he had entered the great temple of Roselia, where the goddess herself was located. Grinning, the young man understood that this was the perfect place for rapid development, since here he would be able to become a recognized paladin. Standing on one knee, he decided to develop. The Lick sat on the roof, realizing all the dirt of his work. There were many people hanging from the scaffolding that needed to be dealt with from the shadows. The skeleton was scrolling through a video on his phone. Looking at it, Hans was talking about how he had unintentionally become a celebrity because the remnants of the organization that was engaged in human trafficking had already been destroyed. Looking at the phone, the skeleton noticed something strange about it. Remembering the villains who always talked about a certain society of divine retribution, the Punisher tried to understand who they were because they seemed to be directly connected to several organizations. Stretching, the Lick said that he had initially decided to sort everything out and then continue the destruction, but now something had gone wrong, so the proceeds should be distributed. The hero was walking down the street. Adjusting his mask, he realized that if the How mask began to trade large volumes of valuable items from unknown sources, the young man would become the prime suspect. Entering a certain store, the hero knew that he needed a place to make such deals. Sitting behind the counter, the seller greeted the visitor. Holding out the bag, the guy said he wanted to sell something. The seller, without looking up from his book, asked the visitor if he really thought this place was a pawn shop and added that he was absolutely not interested in what he brought and told him to get lost. Pouring coins onto the counter, the vampire noted that he had heard earlier that they were interested in such things. Taking the coin in his hand, the seller knew that these were badges of a group that was engaged in human trafficking, a group of a trading syndicate that was destroyed by some madman in a mask. Looking forward, the protagonist asked the seller if she was interested in this deal. Smirking, the man said that he needed to go through the back door and the main thing is not to try to leave now. The guy, opening the door, heard words of greeting. The masked man, sitting at the computer, asked the visitor if he wanted to sell anything at all, to which an affirmative answer followed. Holding out the bag, the vampire asked the worker if he could receive payment in a form other than cash. Taking the coin in his hand, the worker asked if he meant material goods and asked what he wanted. The hero raised a finger. Looking at it, he explained that he wanted a lottery ticket for the main prize and as soon as possible, if possible. Looking away, the vampire knew that cash would be useless if it could not be spent. Imagining himself rich, the hero realized that now he needed legal funds for the original body, and a lottery ticket made such funds untraceable and clean. Typing something on the keyboard, the seller noted that the commission would be quite high and asked the guy if there were any problems with this. The same one answered negatively, but also asked how much such a ticket could be sold for. Pointing his finger at the monitor, the man explained that the ticket was worth 6-1 and had a redemption period of 4 months, while the young man said that everything suited him and asked for 2 more tickets to be prepared. Holding out his hand, the worker explained that with the amount he had paid, this would not happen, while the hero asked him not to worry. Putting his hand into the subspace, the hero said that he currently had enough materials. Putting 3 ingots on the counter, the boy asked if this amount was enough. Grabbing the visitor's hand, the worker could not believe that it was a subspace storage tool, not understanding who this person was or where he got such unusual materials from. Looking at the seller, the hero called out to him. Frowning, he explained that he did not come here to chat and offered to quickly complete this transaction. Removing his hand, the worker apologized and said that in that case they would finish as quickly as possible. Looking at the employee's neck, the boy realized that he constantly smelled a faint smell of blood, which was definitely not an ordinary imagination. Leaning over the man, the vampire explained that this would not be their last deal because from now on they would see each other quite often. Holding the tickets in his hands, the guy talked about fulfilling his dream of winning the lottery. Sitting down on the curb, the young man was already trying to think of what to buy. Putting them in his pocket, he noted that it would be nice to have several subordinates for such things, because it was so difficult to constantly go back and forth. Looking at the crowd, he also said that he would consider it possible and enjoy the night air. Looking at the drunk people, the hero realized that a few months ago this street was empty because of the organization that traded in people. Smiling, the guy understood that now life was in full swing again, and apparently because of all those rumors, but it was nice to be involved in the establishment of a new world. A certain person whispered in his ear a question about where the young man was from. Turning around abruptly, the protagonist couldn't understand how he had gotten so close to him, but the man asked him not to worry. Raising his hand, he explained that he just wanted to chat a little and nothing more, but the vampire didn't understand. Pointing his finger at him, the young man asked him what he was even talking about, since he had snuck up on him from behind and sniffed him earlier. Raising his hand to his face, the stranger asked Heinz if he was a vampire. The man smirked and said that he was also a 6th level vampire and that he was from the Dotmere dimension. Frowning, the young man realized that this was another dimension traveler vampire and listened to the other man's questions about his name and when he returned to Earth. Suddenly, some red waves began to emanate from the man's eye while the protagonist tried to think of something to leave. Under the influence of these waves, the vampire introduced himself and explained that he had been away from Earth for a long time. Gritting his teeth, the protagonist could not understand why the answer had just flown out of his mouth, because could it really be because of his mind control ability? Raising his hand, the other man noted that the young man was still a newbie who had just returned to Earth and added that he should introduce himself first. Handing over his business card, the guy introduced himself as Gamma from the Blood Pack organization, which includes all the vampires on Earth, and his job is to collect vampires who have recently returned to Earth. Taking the card in his hands, the hero asked if such an organization really existed. Gamma explained that if he wanted to survive, he would be better off sticking with him, since he really had no choice. Standing in front of this man, Heinz asked him about the level mentioned above. The latter noted that the hero was apparently starting to get interested. Taking out the keys, he suggested continuing their conversation elsewhere instead of just chatting here. Opening the car, a member of the organization suggested that the guy visit them. Agreeing, the young man got into the car. A certain girl, putting her finger to her ear, turned to the headquarters. Looking ahead, she explained that the target was moving according to plan and they were starting the pursuit. Having driven up to a certain building, Gamma invited the guest to come in. Entering inside, the protagonist asked him about this place. The latter explained that each vampire has a vampiric factor, which determines the level of strength. There was a skull on the shelf and the employee was telling him that they were measuring this factor and sorting vampires into levels. There were some vials with crystals on the shelf in a row. Pointing to the magic circle, Gamma explained that they could use it to measure the level of the vampiric factor. Heinz, his mouth slightly open, understood that this was too suspicious. Leaning against the wall, the organizer was hurrying him to enter the circle faster. The hero realized that if there really was a danger, he could simply cancel the summoning. Suddenly, the guy noticed the skull emitting dark magic. Turning to Gamma, he understood that this was not just dark magic, since different types of it were collected here, namely shamanism, curses, and alchemy, but he did not understand how this could be possible at all. There were many people who were returnees. It had been about 20 years since they first appeared. The reason why magic tools were still rare and magic technology was not developed was because the energy laws of abilities in the dimensions varied greatly. Standing in the center of the circle, the young man understood that if such different abilities were combined into something like this, then this organization would be something much more impressive, when suddenly the robe-clad man asked him to stretch out his hand. Cutting his palm, the unknown man noted that it would burn a little. Blood burst out of his hand and the guy screamed. 5 blood balls flew out of his hand and someone commented on this and explained that this was the 5th level. Rubbing his chin, the robe-clad man explained that judging by how tightly they were connected, his regenerative abilities were quite strong. The hero remembered that purebreds from Ottera were about the 5th or 6th level. Gamma crossed his arms over his chest and said that he was initially nervous because he came from a dimension unknown to him, and added that since he was only a level 5 vampire, it would be a waste of nerves. Grinning, the vampire explained that at level 5, there was no need to cut off limbs and ordered the cultists to begin. They stretched out their hands and answered affirmatively. Raising his hands, the protagonist realized that they had other motives after all. Turning around, he knew from the beginning that this was too complicated a ritual for just measuring the level, so he should quickly summon hands. Suddenly, Gamma looked away. hearing someone breaking down the door. The girl, with her mouth wide open, ordered the level 6 vampire to be frozen. Entering the room, she said that she would arrest him for kidnapping and killing his relatives. Looking at her, the vampire asked if she thought it was rude to barge in out of the blue, while the boy tried to remember who this girl was, as he had definitely seen her before. Saurin pointed her finger at him and explained that when she first heard that he was kidnapping vampires, she didn't know whether to believe it or not, but it turned out to be true. Pointing her finger at Gamma, she ordered him to let the vampire go and surrender. Bowing his head, the boy noted that as expected of a loyal and naive blood pack slave, he asked her if she had ever wondered why they had to be slaves at all. Raising his hands, he shouted about how they were much stronger than humans and why they had to follow the rules of the blood pack, tiptoe around humans, and live underground in secret. Saurin, with her mouth open, screamed that this was nonsense, because it was because of people like Gamma, who were warlike and came up with such things, that they were forced to hide underground. Grinning, the guy said that he understood everything. The man behind him clenched his fist hard and the guy asked if he had the same opinion as her. The man hit the girl with his elbow from behind. Turning to him, Saurin tried to find out from him what he was doing. He pierced her while she was asking why he betrayed them. Looking at her, the man explained that in his dimension he was a powerful lord. Grinning his teeth, he also noted that in this reality he was stuck in a basement and worked as a bouncer in some club. Gamma, approaching her, asked if she understood that not every vampire was comfortable with her. Raising her head, the girl asked the guy about his plan, because was he really just going to kidnap vampires, planning to start a rebellion against the blood pack? The same one noted that it would take centuries with stupid lower vampires. His hand was covered in some red aura while he was talking about how in this dimension you can't accumulate more karma points, which means that they can't become stronger, but after careful research, a way was still found. The body of her partner rose into the air after he said that this is a reliable way to quickly become stronger. With her mouth wide open, the girl asked him about whether he really broke the ban. Smirking, the guy explained that this is where all the kidnapped vampires went. With her eyes widened, Saurin could not believe that this man was going to create crazy vampires again, because did he really forget why they were being persecuted? Gritting his teeth, the hero understood that the girl was talking about crazy cannibal vampires, who were very different on Earth. Imagining the combination of different blood, the young man remembered that when a vampire devours a vampire from another dimension, their different vampiric factors combine and this leads to an increase in strength. But you have to pay a high price for this, because cannibalism among their ancestors caused serious mental disorders. Imagining a maddened creature, the hero knew that if someone cannot overcome themselves, they become a mad vampire who goes crazy from thirst, and after the appearance of the first such creature, they began to be considered a global threat. Holding the girl near him, Gamma explained that they cannot worry, because after numerous studies, they found a way to remove the residual desire for blood. Leaning his hand on her, the vampire shouted that they will create excellent materials for their research. Something began to happen to the girl's body. Her body crumpled on its own and then the protagonist realized what this magic circle was actually created for. Seeing the bloody pill in Gamma's hands, he understood that it was designed to turn vampires into a drug without side effects. Holding out his hand, Minjin asked him to keep his promise since he took a risk by secretly following him. The boy agreed. Throwing him the pill, he said that everything was as promised. The man threw it into his mouth. His eyes opened wide. Throwing his head back, the vampire made shrill sounds. Grinning, the traitor began to understand what it really was because he became bigger and could not believe that this was really possible. He grabbed Saurin by the neck and said that he needed more. Handing it to his partner, the man reminded him that he said he would give them more of the drug, so he should not hesitate. The same one asked him to wait, because undoubtedly this is joy from new strength. But there is one thing. Looking at the hero, Gamma explained that time is needed, because the guest who arrived earlier is still waiting. Approaching the girl, he asked her to wait a little longer while Hines listed the enemies here. With her mouth slightly open, she asked him to stop. The vampire turned his head, hearing the young man's words about cannibalism really being effective. Grinning, the guy said that he couldn't wait to see how strong he could become. Having put a portal under himself, he said that he would absorb them all. Hands, leaving the portal, noted that they really knew how to hide, but their safety was too pitiful. The skeletons rushed to attack, while the Lick said that from now on no one would leave this place without his permission. Gritting his teeth, Minjin asked about who these creatures were, while Gamma asked him not to panic and stick together, because if they separated, they would definitely die. The man clenched his fists with force. He attacked one of the skeletons. The vampire rushed at the Lick, screaming that he should die, while the Punisher thought that the transformation of his enemy's body was quite unusual. Looking at him, the skeleton understood that these creatures even looked different from one dimension to another. The necromancer struck with his staff. The man was pierced by several shadow peaks. Grinning, Khan explained that he tried to catch them with minimal losses, while his comrade said that most likely nothing would help. Jumping on the man's back, the guy assumed that this was a drawback of organic farming, but even this was not a problem. Having bitten him, the young man understood that there was still a lot of food ahead of him. Gamma, his mouth wide open, did not understand what their enemy was doing, because was he really devouring his own kind now? The man, looking back, did not understand how he had lived to this moment and with what determination he had betrayed his former comrades. Letting him go, Heinz noted that he was right, because insanity is much worse. Spitting out some fragments, the vampire felt something. His mouth opened wide in understanding that different vampiric factors were reuniting and evolving. Grinning, the avatar received the ability of hybrid evolution, which gave him a sharp increase in physical abilities from each new vampire he consumed. Sharp claws appeared from his hand, just like the one he ate, and the guy said that with such power, if you go crazy from blood, you can become a very dangerous enemy. Gamma, with wide eyes, listened to his words about what they would still see, because he needed an organization that would carry out his orders and asked about the blood package. Grinning his teeth, the vampire began to talk about what would happen to those who dared to oppose him. Opening his mouth, he explained that such a vampire would become his next meal or part of the undead army. The victim's hand trembled in pain. The clone bit the victim on the neck, sucking out blood. The system informed him of gaining a new vampire trait, Insight. Insight allowed him to measure the physical condition and stats of an opponent. Heinz licked his lips in pleasure and said that the new skill was useless. The vampire's pupil distorted and swam. Vampires had a special skill called heritage, based on their origin. With this skill, the guy was able to change his DNA, taking over the hybrid evolution. Now he could steal the powers of other vampires. The trembling guy behind Heinz asked him what he was doing. While attached to the cross, he asked how he could devour his own kind and remain sane. The protagonist approached the guy asking him if he wanted him to tell him how to prevent the corruption of the mind. Heinz grinned, telling the guy to just not listen to the whispers he heard while eating. The vampire clenched his teeth and got angry. A moment later, he bent his hand due to pain. The system notified him of gaining the skill camouflage. Heinz, looking at the withered corpse, said that there are many ways to use disguise. Putting his hand on the corpse's face, he said that he should look into his head. He saw a guy in a hood, so research, collaboration, and support. Heinz's pupil narrowed when he saw how the Divine Retribution Society was mentioned again. Examining the pentagram on the floor, he realized that even this ritual was their work. The events take us to the streets of the Night City. Saurin slowly opened her eyes. Heinz driving the car scared the girl. She abruptly grabbed him by the throat and accused him of kidnapping. The clone, frightened, told her to look more closely because he was also captured. Removing her hand from the guy's throat, she apologized and asked him to explain what happened. The guy replied saying that he escaped during the chaos when the Hahu mask attacked. Saurin smiled, thanking the guy for not forgetting about her even in such a situation. Raising an eyebrow, the guy asked Saurin what happened in the blood pack. The girl turned away, saying that the blood pack was divided between radicals and moderates. Clenching her fist, she said that they found evidence that the radicals kidnapped one of their team members, so she went there with her colleagues and was close to death. Turning to Heinz, she said that now she was still glad that they got out of there alive, plus they found out about everything. The clone stroked his cheek, realizing that this was not so easy to solve. It was quite obvious that even the highest ranks of the radicals were involved. Smiling, Saurin asked the protagonist his name and what he should be called. Continuing to lead, the guy said that she can call him whatever she likes. Looking into the distance, he said that he recently returned to Earth, so he is not yet connected with anyone. He followed Gamma, because it was interesting to learn about the blood pack. Turning half sideways to the guy, Saurin said that most vampires are part of their organization, and the moderate ones do not do strange things, and they also have a stable supply of blood bags. The protagonist, driving a car through a dark city, said that he would look into this organization then. By morning, they reached the girl's house. As soon as they entered the house, Saurin's sister came out to them. The girl jumped on her sister and hugged her, asking if everything was okay. Saurin did not answer and pointed at the guy and introduced him to Nahai as a vampire who wanted to join their organization. Stroking her sister on the head, the girl said that she would now show Heinz his room, and she should stay here and play. Soon the couple began to climb the stairs. Raising his hand, Heinz asked the girl if Nahai's appearance was just a show. Saurin answered by saying that Nahai was not returned. Bowing her head, she said that the girl was born and raised on Earth. Pointing to the painting on the wall, she said that her father was a returnee. He was the one who turned her into a vampire to save her from a chronic disease. Heinz thought about it. Now he understood why the government wanted to keep vampires under control, because they were no different from an infectious disease. It was like they held the earth in their hands. Turning to the guy, the girl said that this method is not one of those usually used, because to turn someone on Earth, several times more strength is required. Looking at Nahai through the window, she said that her father wanted her to be able to feel confident even under the sun, so he reached the limit of his capabilities. Saurin pulled the door handle. Entering inside, the girl told Heinz that if he needed anything, he could call her. Then she waved her hand and said goodbye. The protagonist froze, comparing the girl with one streamer. He remembered how he sat and watched her streams. He immediately pointed at her, asking if she was a streamer nicknamed Orchid. Saurin was embarrassed, her mouth wide open and her eyes wide in shock. Covering her cheeks with her hands, she said that this outrow from the stream was stuck in her head. The girl asked the guy if he was her subscriber. Heinz waved his hand, saying that the algorithms just recommended her to him a couple of times. Remembering her performances in the past, Saurin said that she was actually a trainee, but when she quit, she felt sad and decided to stream. The protagonist smiled, asking her how old she was. Saurin answered, saying that she was already 22 years old, and when she woke up she was 18 years old. Clenching her fist, delighted, Saurin asked Heinz how old he was. Suddenly, she found herself behind the door, and the guy himself shouted at her, saying that he would tell her everything later. Touching her lips with her finger, she thought, trying to understand if he said something wrong. Heinz leaned against the door and exhaled. He thought that she was younger than him, and that's why he spoke so informally. The guy bit his finger, realizing that the girl was older than him. Sitting on the bed, he said that in any case, she looked familiar. He heard that she was quite famous. Logging into the girl's account through his phone, he read a post that she would not have streams for a week. The protagonist settled into a new house. If not for him, for the Orchid audience, this would have been her last announcement. Soon the sky turned bright blue. A scream was heard from Saurin's house. The protagonist grabbed his head, not understanding why someone was screaming in the morning. He started to walk down the steps, listening to Saurin screaming, asking how it was possible that there was no evidence to prove it. The girl stopped screaming when she saw Heinz coming down. She closed her eyes and said that her colleagues had gone to the crime scene yesterday, but everything had been burned, so they couldn't find anything. The protagonist covered his mouth with his fist, realizing that they had gone too far trying to erase Heinz's traces. Then he told Saurin that he had to ask her something, namely where the radical's base was. The girl shuddered and opened her mouth wide. She grabbed the guy's hand, asking the guy if he didn't like their organization. When the protagonist explained to her that the radicals were dangerous and wanted to know the location of their bases to avoid them, the girl smiled widely, saying that it made sense. She immediately picked up the phone, saying to wait a bit. Taking the phone back, Heinz thought that now his level corresponded to 6th or 7th by earthly standards. When Saurin asked the guy if she should have cooked something for him, the guy raised his hand, telling her not to worry about it. He looked closely at the marked locations on his phone, saying that there were many good restaurants nearby. Licking his lips, the guy said that he decided to take a walk and try some good food. The protagonist licked the blood from his finger, saying that it was delicious. The corpses of the vampires were scattered around the room, and the blood stained the entire room. The protagonist, licking his fingers, looked away. The surviving vampire, gritting his teeth in anger, said that their clan would not leave him even bone marrow. Heinz picked up a couple of broken glasses with mana and asked the vampire how he knew him. The glasses blocked the camera, making it impossible to see, and thanks to the previously received disguise, now only an empty and clean hall was visible through the cameras. Standing in front of the vampires, Heinz said that he had no problems. Crouching in front of the vampires, he told him to try to tell him where his other comrades were. Through his memories, he saw the hooded man ordering the Gamma members to gather at the villa tomorrow. Heinz looked at his hand on the vampire's body. He bared his teeth, realizing that since the radical leaders had gathered, this was a great chance to catch them all at once. The boy straightened up, letting go of the corpse. He still had to clean up here. A bloody flower formed above his palm. The flower's leaves flew apart. This flower collected all the blood around and turned it into a flame flower. The blood in the entire hall began to burn. The protagonist clenched his fist, intending to hide all traces of his presence. Soon, all the bodies were burned. Suddenly, his heart stopped. Veins appeared on his palm. His body evolved again. Blood burst out of Heinz's mouth. The system reported the evolution of a special skill. Several of the protagonist's teeth fell to the floor when the system notified that due to the effects of hybrid evolution, he had gained enlightenment. The guy's appearance had changed. Now his recovery abilities had gone beyond what was possible. The guy examined his hands. Now he had become a vampire of true blood. The vampire's claw had lengthened. He cut his wrist, from which blood gushed out. Drops of blood froze in the air. A moment later, they flew back. All the blood began to enter the wound again. The arterial wound disappeared in a second. Now, even if the guy's hand was cut off, if he could attract blood from the surrounding world during a fight, he would become almost invincible. Looking at the picture, the protagonist asked himself how incredible vampires of sacred blood must be. A bat appeared on the screen when someone donated to Saurin. The girl smiled sweetly and began to thank the fan. Suddenly, Heinz entered the room. He opened his mouth in amazement and froze. Saurin turned her head when the guy said that of course he knew that making money from people was always difficult. The girl screamed and raised her hands in embarrassment, telling him to stop. A moment later, a girl's scream was heard in the house, telling Hines to scream before entering. Saurin closed her eyes and sighed. Standing in front of the beaten guy, she asked him what happened. The vampire handed her a letter saying that it came in her name. Inside were photos from the radicals' ritual and their test subjects. Saurin froze, taking out a couple of photos. She imagined Hahu, realizing that only he could do such a thing. Looking at the guy getting up, the girl thought mentally, saying that she shared the information not with Hahu, but with him, and the clues began to come after she told about the location of the radicals. Looking at the smiling vampire, she assumed that this could either be a coincidence or Hines and Hahu were working together. The protagonist looked at the moon in the sky. He asked Hahu, who was standing next to him, if all the radicals were really gathering here. He answered, saying that the meeting would be held here. Hines' eye flashed brightly. Using his insight, he saw a bloody barrier outside the building. Inside, the radicals were all sitting on the first floor. Hahu sank into the shadows. Hines himself jumped off the roof, wanting to rush in and destroy everyone at once. A moment later, he broke the window and flew inside. Upon landing, he told the vampires inside to prepare to be caught. Suddenly, he froze, not seeing anyone inside the hall. The space behind the guy began to shatter as someone said that they were actually trying to catch Hahu's mask. The space shattered like glass and vampires appeared from there. The protagonist turned to them as they asked him if they could track him down as well. With a smirk on his face, the vampire boss asked One and Shin if they knew anything about the new arrival. One grinned and said that the new arrival was at least level 7, but he was completely unfamiliar. Shin bared her teeth, saying that this guy came from a place they had never seen before. Hines gritted his teeth, imagining the pyramid and realizing that the beta matched the memories of the radicals. The leader was the alpha. Under him were 2 betas and 13 gammas. Both betas bared their teeth looking at him. The group in masks behind were from the Divine Retribution Society. Hines did not feel their energy. Approaching the protagonist, the boss ordered his subordinates to grab this guy along with the shadow. Hines involuntarily looked at his shadow. The guy grinned, telling the boss that he did not even give a signal before doing the action. The man's eye flashed when he said that he would deal with him himself. The protagonist stood on his toes using blood flow enhancement. In an instant, he tore off the head of one of the opponents. The vampire's blood in his hand was immediately dried up. Pointing at the guy, one of the gammas said that he was devouring his own tribesmen. Dark mana spilled under the vampire's feet. Skeletons began to rise from the shadows when Hahu said that the real show was just beginning. The guy pushed one of his kin, saying that he definitely had to survive. Pulling the door handle, he couldn't open it. A stream of dark mana threw him back. Hahu, standing in the doorway, enveloped in mana, said that they probably thought that they were the only ones who set up a barrier. The clone's mask seemed to laugh, looking at the enemy. Hines grinned, saying that now there would be a fight to the death. Hahu's eyes flashed when he said that no one would escape from here. The heads flew off the shoulders of the vampires. Vaughn froze in shock, looking at the corpse. He clenched his teeth in anger, mentally saying that this was not an ordinary 7th level opponent. Vaughn rushed at the protagonist. The guy's claws lengthened. Vaughn stared in shock at the approaching claws. His skin was covered in crystals when the claw almost reached him. Thanks to the strengthening of his skin, he broke the protagonist's claws. Hines grinned, concentrating mana in his hand. Clenching his fist, he said that he would have to put in more effort. The protagonist's fist struck one's body. The growths on one's body began to disintegrate. He had never lost with skin reinforcement, but now he was surpassed in strength and speed. One's body was thrown back. The other vampires immediately came to his aid. Hines pointed his palms at the vampires, saying that they were too confident for small fry. 2 whips of blood pierced the opponents. One gritted his teeth, mentally saying that this was madness. He immediately concentrated mana in his hand using skin reinforcement. One surprised the protagonist by appearing right in front of him. With one blow, he cut off his hand. The guy's hand froze in midair due to the blood controlling it. Hines drank the blood of pierced vampires to restore strength and become more powerful. His hand healed in a second. One felt a terrifying aura. He no longer saw the protagonist in front of him. Frowning, the guy tried to figure out where the enemy had disappeared. Hines, who had used invisibility, appeared behind Vaughn. He pierced the enemy's back. His lips stretched into a grin. The system informed the boy about receiving a new vampirism factor. Hines, hearing this, lifted Vaughn's body above himself. Then the system informed him that the mystery of blood was absorbing subordinate skills. The boy's legs trembled. He felt how his abilities were controlled by his desire. The blood around him rose into the air. Now Hines could control the abilities more freely and quickly. Shin clenched her fist, calling the protagonist a bloodthirsty vampire. Frowning, the girl with the stitched eye said that it was no wonder he used such strange abilities. Picking at her ear, Heinz asked Shin if she was going to sit here and whine all day. The veins bulged on Shin's face when the protagonist asked her why she didn't act when half of the vampires were already killed. Was she really scared? The girl rushed to attack in anger. Heinz's eye emitted a weak aura. Suddenly, bloody spikes appeared under the girl's feet. A moment later, her entire body was entangled in bloody fetters. When the protagonist approached her, she said that he was using petty tricks. Heinz heard her and said that it was a little offensive. Reaching out his hand to her, he said that he would still tell her something. Heinz suddenly swung his hand, hitting Shin in the throat. The vampire boss standing behind him stepped back, saying that no one would have thought that the Hahu mask had such a partner. He looked back and ordered his subordinates to prepare the core. The sphere in the vampire's hand glowed brightly. Streams of light rushed towards the protagonist. Hahu suddenly appeared in front of him. He reflected the attacks back, saying that this attack was useless. The vampire frowned and looked at his opponent in horror. His boss saw him start to turn around to escape. He immediately pushed the vampire away, asking him where he was going. The vampire's body arched as a terrible pain pierced him. The boss kicked him in the direction of Hahu, saying, "Fight for the Divine Retribution Society." The space around the boss himself lit up. He was about to escape using spatial manipulation. He involuntarily looked at the approaching Hahu. The abandoned vampire's body began to beat like a heart. Hahu, who stood in front of him, realized that it was a curse that caused self-destruction. He extended his hand, saying that he was sure that their leader was planning to force him to retreat, but it turned out to be the opposite. A hand of dark mana lifted the vampire up. Hahu's own hand was enveloped in mana. For him, this curse was laughable. The palm squeezed the vampire. The two cores inside his body were the source of energy, and the protagonist was going to remove them. Throwing the vampire's body to the ground, Hahu said that he controlled death. Did he really think that he could avoid death by standing in front of him? An explosion occurred outside the villa. The vampire boss gritted his teeth and cursed. He sat on the ground, mentally saying that the barrier was too strong. Suddenly, a clone landed behind him. Hahu grabbed him by the collar. Standing in front of the man, he said that he wanted to play with him for a while, but he never thought that he would escape again. The clone's eye lit up as he said that he would just do it his way from now on. Dark mana began to pour into the vampire leader's forehead. Hahu was invading his mind. All of the man's memories were visible. His childhood, how he was an ordinary member wearing a mask, and even his murder from yesterday. Suddenly, the leader's head began to glow. A bright light illuminated Hahu, who began to curse in his mind, realizing that a safety mechanism or memory protection technology had been activated. A moment later, he found himself in an empty space. Hahu turned around, hearing someone tell him that she had not come back to life, that he would go so far. Turning to the entity on the throne, the clone asked him if he had been watching him all this time, and from his own mind, it seemed he was the leader of Divine Retribution. The entity smiled, inviting Hahu to join them. Standing in front of the entity, the clone asked what the purpose of Divine Retribution was. The spirit body spread its arms out to the sides and said that the goal was simple: to gain freedom for the returnees, to create a world ruled by the returnees. Hahu stood still, saying that for an organization that had only recently gained fame, their goals seemed too ambitious. The entity extended its arms towards Hahu and said that they had actually existed for much longer. The space around the clone changed as it said that since they had existed before, they had definitely committed terrorist acts in the past. Hahu's scarred legs twitched. The protagonist gritted its teeth and demanded an answer from the entity. The system immediately reported that the center of the mind regulates emotions. The protagonist's heart began to beat more slowly as the system tried to calm him down. The entity chuckled and said that it didn't matter, so he hoped that he would make a wise choice. As Hahu struck, his fist froze in front of the entity. The entity interlaced its fingers and told Hahu that this was the mental realm, and here mental power exceeded magical power. He smiled broadly and said that he could not be defeated here. Hahu's eyes sparkled again. Heinrich closed his eyes, pouring in spiritual power. The vampire clone also froze, raising the hand of one of the enemies. The protagonist closed his eyes, mentally telling the entity that he would not be able to defeat them. A moment later, Hahu destroyed the barrier into pieces. The gargoyle statue rose and fell. The clone raised it with the help of chains. The veins on his hand bulged. Suddenly, he raised his hand above himself, reciting 1,022 repetitions. Then he released the handle. Standing on a hill, Heinrich breathed heavily. The system informed him of receiving a special skill, the blessing of a strong body. Then it informed him of receiving a new skill, the Ottera. Clenching his fist, Heinrich was pleased. He was getting closer to the level of the High Priestess. Walking along the columns, the guy could not believe that he had surpassed his limit through physical training. Heinrich clenched his fist again and was pleased. Now he met the criteria of a paladin. The guy straightened up abruptly after hearing a gentle voice. In the garden, he saw a saint. Approaching the railing, he mentally said that although she was a saint, at first glance she seemed like an ordinary girl to him. The girl smiled sweetly, greeting Heinrich. The protagonist closed his eyes, seeing how her aura of light spread due to divine power. Bowing his head, he asked the girl why she was alone in such a place. Opening her eyes, the saint said that she was simply watching a ladybug in a flower meadow. Heinrich stopped smiling, realizing that the saint was not looking at the flowers, but at a bug. The girl's aura shone again when she turned to Heinrich, congratulating him for the blessing he had received. In her eyes, the aura around the guy became bright. Closing her eyes again, she told the boy that his blessing could not be obtained with anyone's help, so he should be proud of himself. The boy nervously smiled, thanking her for the praise. Hearing the ringing of the bell, the saint looked at the tower, saying that it was time for the service. Pointing to the corridor, she asked Heinrich if they should go to the church together. The protagonist agreed to follow her. Looking at her, he understood why the saint was so obsessed with hands. In the distant past, the saint stood in the middle of ruins. The first immortal king turned half the continent into a land of death with his halberd and demon. Corpses were scattered across the battlefield. Entire nations united to defeat him. In the end, his corpse fell to the ground. His heart was restored by his closest ally, a dark sorcerer, who was able to escape right from the battlefield. The king arose as a corpse in the camp of the second immortal king and destroyed the great empire in the west. Once again, the knights' corpses fell to the ground and piled up. The chosen one of the order almost destroyed the enemy's hearts by piercing them with his sword. But the heart broke into 3 pieces, which fell into the hands of different people. The saint stood by the hero's coffin. Every time the question of the immortal king's return arose, the divine order was the first to prepare for battle. The saint stood at the counter and began to read a prayer. For her, hostility towards the immortal king was quite natural. The protagonist stood with his palms clasped, mentally saying that there was no need for all this anymore, because this guy was surprisingly good-natured and kind. Closing his eyes, he saw Hahu's situation. He immediately released his spiritual energy, concentrating it on Hahu. A painful cry was heard in the huge mansion. The man was coughing up blood. The servant fell to his knees and asked the judge if he was okay. The man pushed him away. He gritted his teeth, feeling angry. He couldn't believe that he was being defeated in the spiritual dimension. His avatar was wounded by the protagonist's fist. With one blow, he threw the man's avatar back. The avatar knelt down trying to heal his wounds. At first he had a clear advantage, but now everything was the opposite. Accumulating spiritual power in front of his hand, he mentally cursed. Dark mana cut through the avatar's body. Hahu's hand was enveloped in his mana. Throwing his head back, the man tried to understand why he lost. A tear rolled down his face. He couldn't believe that his skills in the spiritual dimension were not enough. Hunched over, he said that he was giving an urgent directive. Turning to his subordinate, he shouted, ordering him to suspend all operations, delete all information in Korea, and hide. Gritting his teeth, he said to inform the commander that a monster had appeared in Korea. Hahu stood in front of the avatar's broken body. He took the fragment in his hands, mentally saying that even with the center of the mind, the enemy was not simple. He would need to study it later, but he regretted losing track of it. The system notified that the entity was absorbing someone else's karma, and the ability of dark magic was evolving. Hahu froze, looking at the system window. He burned the fragment in his palm, the remainder of what was scattered across the spiritual dimension. The guy clenched his fist. A moment later, he concentrated mana over his palm, intending to read the memories from the fragment and find the Divine Retribution Society. Seeing a huge building in the forest, he immediately understood where it was. His body turned into a shadow. The guy was not going to give anyone a chance to escape. After some time, explosions began to occur in the building. The scientist lying on the floor was angry, saying that he was informed about the evacuation, but they did not say that such a monster was approaching. Standing in front of the man, Hahu asked him if they had already given the order to evacuate. The protagonist lifted the scientist with his hand and said that at least a start had been made. Clenching his fist, he said that all the important materials had already been disposed of. The protagonist snatched the documents from the scientist's hands, saying that he had accidentally handed them over to him while trying to save at least a fragment of the data. As he began to read the sheets, the guy froze. His hands began to tremble and the paper crumpled. In an instant, he turned around, cutting the scientist's body. He remembered kneeling and watching the explosion. Now he knew that it was the work of this organization. Hahu tore the sheet, saying that he would kill every member of Divine Retribution. In the past, the guy watched the aftermath of the explosion and thought that he could do nothing because it was an accident. He clenched his fist when he learned about everything. Hahu got his hands on a map and information about the group behind the incident, which completely destroyed his family and his life. Wiping away his tears, the protagonist mentally said that the members of this organization were on a completely different level, something he had never encountered before. Grinning, the Mad Heinz told himself that he still needed to expand his influence further, no matter how much time and resources it would take. The guy's body tensed up. He began to suck in all the blood in the area through his hand. He used the skill Purified Blood Crystal, and created a blood crystal. He was going to purify the blood in the body to transplant it into the chest of another vampire to strengthen his vampiric factor. Heinz smiled looking at the crystal. The crystal hovered above his palm, while he was thinking about the fact that the blood transfusion would bind the vampire to him. But those who obey him will be accepted, and those who resist will be destroyed. A moment later, he crushed the crystal. Events take us to Saurin's house. A sign appeared on the girl's door asking to knock at the entrance. The girl sitting in the chair asked the protagonist if he really got rid of the radicals and now wanted to meet with the leader of their faction. The protagonist closed his eyes and said that with the exception of a few alphas, he had already taken care of everyone, and now he needed to discuss something with their leader. Saurin raised her hand and thoughtfully said that too much information had come to her at once. She would of course report, but it would take time to confirm. The protagonist abruptly released his aura, asking if that would be enough. The guy's aura scared the girl. Her eyes reflected the appearance of the aura. She knew that Heinz was strong, but she did not think that he was that strong. Soon the protagonist was sitting opposite the leader of the moderate faction. She said that she could not even think that he had destroyed all the radicals on his own. Pouring blood into a glass, she said that this was an unexpected offer. Closing her eyes, the woman said that it could make you worry. The protagonist raised his hand, saying that he had no intention of giving absurd orders, because his goal was to establish peace and order. He slightly tensed his hand, releasing an aura, and said that his goal was also to eradicate everyone associated with the Divine Retribution Society. The woman smiled, asking him if he thought that these goals could contradict each other. Raising an eyebrow, the guy said that it depends on what you take as a standard. He lowered his hand, enveloping it in mana. He was going to force her to agree in case of refusal. The guy sharply frowned when he heard the woman's agreement. Extending his hand, he asked the faction leader what she believed so much that she agreed. The girl smiled and extended her hand, saying that she only believed in herself, so she would help him eradicate the radicals. Pointing at Saurin, she told the guy to take her with him so that she would connect them with them. Ignoring the frozen Saurin, the protagonist said that everything was going as he wanted. Raising her hand, the woman said that now they should begin a detailed discussion. The servant poured blood into the protagonist's glass. The girl smiled and raised her glass and said that they would also talk about the new centrist faction. Heinz chuckled as he raised his glass. He decided to first absorb the remains of the radicals and become the leader of the new faction. A moment later, they clinked their glasses. The events take us to Saurin's house. Sweat rolled down the vampire's face. Heinz, standing behind her, said that he was starting the procedure. The crystal pierced Saurin's back. Her capillaries glowed due to the influx of energy. The purified crystal entered the heart and began to heat it. The blood began to pump faster. The muscles and bones throughout her body began to strengthen. Saurin opened her mouth in pleasure. She felt as if she had been reborn. Heinz, standing behind her, mentally said that the crystal has a maximum amplification of 30%, and this is not a small number. Turning around, Saurin addressed Heinz as a lord and asked what they will do now. Seeing his puzzled face, she said, using the tree as an example, that he has now created his own clan, at the head of which he stood. Smiling and closing her eyes, she said that since they founded a new race on Earth, they need a suitable name. The protagonist rubbed his chin and thought he wanted his clan to stand out in some way. Looking at the girl's heart, he mentally said that all vampires who accepted the purified crystal underwent mutation, accepting the dominant factors of his blood. Grinning, he said that his clan will be called Heteroses. Putting his hand on his side, he said that from now on they will call themselves a hybrid force, Heteroses. The guy grinned and frowned, mentally saying that he will grow the strongest vampires. The protagonist stretched and said that Heinz's affairs were now settled, although it was not enough to destroy the Divine Retribution Society. Seonghyun rubbed his chin, realizing that the society might have disappeared from Korea, but it seemed that they were a global organization. The protagonist's eye did not close as he looked through all the information. He needed to prepare better to destroy them in one go. To do this, he needed to increase his influence in another world and accumulate karma. One way was war and terrorism, causing destruction all over the world. Seonghyun gritted his teeth and became angry with himself. He suddenly jumped up, scolding himself for such thoughts. He realized that if he did this, innocent people would suffer. He clenched his fist, mentally saying that he needed a way to create an incident without involving anyone. Suddenly, he looked at the book of the first fantasy. He picked it up and was happy. He decided to create the demon king Hans, who threatens humanity. Also the true hero Heinrich, confronting him with shining armor. The protagonist smiled while reading the book. Flipping through the pages, Seonghyun said that getting rid of the villains and earning karma. At the same time, the guy turned around, calling Harley. Harley, who was lifting a dumbbell, grinned. He was the fifth clone. Approaching the guy, the protagonist mentally said that he intended to pump him up properly after expanding the limits. Seonghyun smiled widely. Hans rubbed his chin, saying that this place would do. At the top was a ruined house. From it there was a pipe for supplying oxygen, and at the very bottom was a laboratory that Hans entered. He approached the capsule with the monster, realizing that experiments were conducted here, demons were transplanted into people and chimeras were created. Standing in front of another capsule, Hans said that the samples he was looking for were right here. Removing his hand from the capsule, he thought about something that constantly absorbs only strong features and evolves. Hans stood in front of the dragon's body. He collected dragon blood in a flask. If Harley adapts to this procedure and he applies the knowledge gained, they will create an amazing hybrid. Harley will become a biological weapon like the Minotaur. Raindrops fell on the leaves. The saint stood alone in the square. Heinrich approached Ristar asking her what was bothering her. Heinrich covered the saint with an umbrella asking why she was standing in the rain. Ristar turned away saying that it was all because of the weather, she was too gloomy. Pressing her hands to her chest, she said that she felt depressed, as if part of her chest was squeezed. Continuing to stand next to the girl, the protagonist said that she might catch a cold, so she should go back inside. The events take us to the mountains. In one of the parts of which the dark mana was condensed, Hans's voice was heard, saying that even in the middle of the remote mountains, despite the area surrounded by double barriers, the saint was able to sense this refuge. Heinz, who was standing in the lab with Hans, told him that fortunately, the girl did not fully understand her sensation. Raising the flask with blood, Hans said that he could now conduct a full experiment. The dragon was terrifying, especially its flames, but its blood evolves gradually, acquiring the features of the prey it consumed. Hans's grimoire flew up as he said that the research information from the Divine Retribution Society and its forbidden knowledge should be enough. Harley grinned as he lay on the bed and said that he was also the perfect test subject. The guy suddenly smiled widely and left. The events take us to the Divine Order. The Pope stood in front of the protagonist and asked him if he swears to become a paladin of the Great Divine Order and protect the innocent. When Heinrich swore, the Pope held out a cross. When he put it on his neck, the cross glowed brightly and the system immediately reported that the conditions for enlightenment had been met, for which he received a new skill. The bright light made the Pope step back. People were amazed that Heinrich received enlightenment during the initiation ceremony. Someone put a hand on the guy's shoulder. For a short moment he felt the touch of a deity. The guy froze, not understanding why this was happening. The deity was standing next to him. He understood that this was not just curiosity. Heinrich smiled, deciding to test the blessing while he had time. On the system screen, he saw a description of the skill. It allowed him to go beyond the boundaries of space. The guy's lips stretched even wider, he saw no restrictions, and this was one of the best abilities. He clasped his hands and raised his hands, shouting a prayer to God. The old men sitting nearby couldn't hold back their tears, saying that they saw a truly pious young man. Many knights and paladins approached the guy, congratulating him on his promotion. Pointing at the three paladins with his hand, the guy said that they were representatives of the orders and they came to invite him. Each of the orders used different weapons and techniques. The guy with the spear was from the Order of the Heavenly Shield. They specialized in the outer defense of the city and used the technique of the long spear. The paladin with a scar on his eye was from the Order of the Sun Wolf. They were on the front lines and used devastating attacks with a two-handed sword. The third was a man with red hair and a beard to match. He was a veteran of the Order of the Thunderclaw. They were in charge of the inner security of the city and used sword and shield fighting techniques. The three paladins smiled widely, asking Heinrich who he should join. The guy chuckled, saying that he didn't need to think twice. Hitting his chest, he said that he would train with everyone. With the ability of the warrior spirit and accelerated development, the guy's muscles and physique were much better than others. Even their structure was perfect. The guy glanced to the side. Pointing to the girl to the side, he asked if she was a member of the order. His friend nervously smiled and tried to dissuade the guy from the idea of finding out more. The girl, standing with her arms crossed, said that their order only selects the best of the best. Looking sadly at the guy, she said that he was not bad. Assessing the aura of the guy's divine power, she said that he could pass the test. The protagonist followed the girl, mentally indignant. His divine power was much higher than that of the high priests, but according to the criteria, he barely passed. Walking along the corridors, the girl said that their order guards the most important fortress of the Great Temple. Soon they opened the door. Entering the office with the Inquisitor, the girl said that she would tell everything later. Heinrich looked closely at the man in the plague doctor's clothes and understood everything at once. Closing her eyes, the paladin next to him said that he needed to read the text written on the board, and he needed to speak clearly so that the god himself could hear him. Heinrich froze, assuming that this was some kind of device for filtering out spies. He gritted his teeth, realizing that his essence could be discovered, so he discontentedly told the girl that he was insulted that his faith was being questioned. Opening her eyes, the paladin told him that this was a normal procedure. Heinrich gritted his teeth again. He approached the table and began to read the text. The statue's eyes glowed brightly. A moment later, a seal of silence appeared on the protagonist's tongue. He covered his mouth, feeling the heat on his tongue. Following the girl, he asked her what they did. Did they really put a ban on revealing secrets? The paladin answered saying that it was a blessing. Closing her eyes, she said that it was a blessing of silence that would not allow him to reveal secret information. Soon she stopped near the guards. Turning to the protagonist, she said that they were the Order of the Radiant Light, and their mission was to guard the dungeons of the Great Temple at the cost of their lives. The guard grabbed his sword. Two guards simultaneously plunged their swords into the gate. When the gate opened, the protagonist mentally said that he expected to see everything here, but definitely not this. The reason for all these words of security, prohibitions, blessings, and other things turned out to be a piece of the heart of the immortal king, located in chains. The chains securely bound the piece of the heart. Heinrich approached the fountain. He could not believe that the heart was hidden in the dungeon of the Great Temple. The guy realized that these knights on horses simply could not have found at least one piece of the heart of the immortal king in several centuries. He clenched his fist. Heinrich wanted to take the heart right now, but he was not strong enough. 4 representatives and their orders guarded this dungeon. Even hands could not steal the heart. The protagonist frowned, realizing that he needed to think through his plan carefully. Suddenly, a paladin approached him, saying that because of the mark in his mouth, he would not be able to say anything. Standing next to the guy, she said that it was better for him not to tell anyone about the seal on his tongue. The protagonist and his comrades put their hands to their chests, saying that no one else would know about this except him. Han laughed while standing in his lab. He rubbed his chin, thinking that Harley's condition was too unstable. Looking at the exhausted body, Hans tried to understand what the problem was. Harley coughed and said that something was boiling inside. Hans glanced at the sensor screens, and they showed that the dragon blood had definitely taken root in the body. The skeleton abruptly pulled the lever, deciding to try to adjust the intensity. Harley's body arched from the horrific pain. The skeleton froze, wondering if he had exceeded the limit of super regeneration. Hans grabbed the lever again. He knew that if everything went wrong, he would lose Harley and his research. The flasks with blood began to boil. Hans decided to go for broke and inject all the remaining dragon blood. Harley's eyes were bloodshot. He screamed in agony. A bright light lit up the entire lab. Hans looked at Harley's body and swore it was a failure. Turning away, he asked his friend for forgiveness. Suddenly, a system window appeared in front of him. The system notified about the increase in skills and the opening of new potential. Suddenly, Harley's body arched and trembled. The shackles on his hand cracked. The system informed him about the evolution of the super regeneration skill. The guy stood up and, straining all his muscles, growled like an animal. The skeleton raised his hands, saying that his mind had finally connected. The guy rubbed his neck, saying that the mutation effect was not bad. It seemed that he had become a representative of a completely new species. Taking a pen in his hand, Hans began to write down the results of the experiment. Holding a grimoire in his hand, the skeleton said that the number of his avatars had increased again. Suddenly, Harley put his hand on his notebook, saying that he would figure out how to use the new avatar later. Grinning, he said that now he should test his abilities. The events take us to the forest. Harley was standing in the middle of the forest. He closed his eyes. All his senses became sharp, like a razor. Looking back, the guy said that now he could hear the faint breathing of the lurking beast. The panther growled and rushed to attack. In an instant, she was above the protagonist. Harley grinned, saying that she was a representative of the same species that he met when he first crossed over to another world. A moment later, he grabbed the panther by the throat. After that, he knocked her to the ground, saying that since then his skills have changed a lot. The guy swung to strike. Having struck, he created a wound from which blood gushed. Having torn apart the chest, the guy stared at the crystal. Taking it in his hand, he said that he needed to devour the rage of monsters. The guy threw the crystal into his mouth. The system immediately reported the acquisition of enlightenment. The veins all over Harley's body bulged. He raised his hands and shouted, saying that he would strengthen the effect with the help of physical mutation. Examining his body, Harley said that a strong physique gives an advantage in battle. The system notified the guy about the acquisition of the gluttonous feast skill. The protagonist put his hand to his stomach, hearing it rumble. The gluttonous feast allowed to digest any food easily and quickly. Sitting down in front of the corpse, the guy said that with the use of physical mutation he becomes very hungry. Harley took the heart in his hand and licked his lips. A moment later he bit off a piece of the heart. The raw meat tasted sweet, and the blood was refreshing. The protagonist grinned widely. He could not hold back his laughter. The guy glanced sharply to the side. Remembering the map of the area, he said that in the southern part of the continent there is an association of barbarian tribes. Harley thought, rubbing his chin. The events take us to the county of the kingdom of Ottera, to the Tavern Sailor Guild. People inside the tavern looking at the newcomer tried to understand what brought him here. The man behind the counter greeted Harley with fear. The guy put his hands on his hips and grinned. His body was pretty cool, maybe even too much. Because of this, people avoided him. The goal of this muscle-bound brute was to become a hero who could influence the continent. He had to leave such a vivid impression that no one could ever forget him. The man behind the counter began to tremble all over. The protagonist hit the table saying that he was here to destroy the monsters in the northern mountains near the Steel Fortress. In a small tavern in the middle of the city, a man's voice was heard saying that he was immediately bringing him to the ship. The events take us to the Divine Order. The spear fell to the ground after sparring. The judge raised his hand and declared Heinrich the winner. The guy was enveloped in holy energy when someone praised him for having mastered all the techniques of wielding the weapons of the Knight's Order. The system notified the protagonist about gaining enlightenment and the ability to wield weapons in a complex manner. The protagonist walked along the hall. Walking along the corridor, the guy told himself that now his fencing was even more perfect. This experience would greatly help his other avatars. The boy clenched his fist and looked to the side. He saw Ristar standing in the garden. The boy did not understand why she was dressed in full ceremonial attire. Approaching the girl, he asked her what she was doing here. The girl pointed to the worms, saying that when it rains, worms always crawl out, and she shared some of her holy power with them to cheer them up. The protagonist froze. He hoped that the worms blessed with the power of the holy would not become gigantic like in some fantasy movie. Ristar turned to the boy when he asked her if there would be some kind of event since she was dressed in full ceremonial attire. The girl closed her eyes, saying that an unusual guest would soon arrive and he would be able to track down the immortal king. The protagonist involuntarily almost pointed at himself and smiled. He did not believe that someone would be able to track down Hans, who was hiding behind layers of barriers. Opening one eye, the saint said that she was not sure that she could explain it well. Then she asked the guy if he wanted to participate in the event as an honorary guardian knight. Heinrich smiled widely. The knights lined up in the hall, waiting for the guest along with the saint. The protagonist, who was standing guard, frowned. He had never seen such a lineup before. Soon he saw 3 figures of elves enter the hall. Heinrich frowned even more and opened his mouth in shock. The elf put his hand to his chest and introduced himself as a high elf of the kingdom of Elven. Granwood smiled, looking at the saint. The events take us to a jewelry store. The seller frowned and called out to the customer, saying that it was good to look around, but 2 hours had already passed. The guy in a white shirt and a red tie smiled. Taking the chain in his hand, he asked for forgiveness. Hubert, who was the 6th clone of the protagonist, turned to the seller and said that his knowledge was insufficient. Hubert was obtained thanks to Harley's growth. The two were now connected. His initial skill, analysis, allowed him to see information about an object, like the pendant in his hand. Since his skill level is low, he can only see basic information, but even so, he can distinguish between various treasures, paintings, and coins from fakes. Hubert had to improve himself to become the best merchant on the continent. But before that, he needed to deal with the opposition in the form of dissatisfied merchants turning away from him. Looking out the window, Hubert realized that in order to solve the problem, Harley's heroic influence must increase. The events take us to the snowy mountains. Harley threw his axe over his shoulder and called out to the beast, asking him if he was the biggest problem in the mountains. The angry bear turned around upon hearing his voice. He roared and pounced on the guy. Harley smiled, swinging his weapon. In an instant, he swung the axe several times to deflect the bear's blow. There was even a bleeding wound on the monster's body. Harley smiled and screamed with pleasure. He jumped up. A moment later, he swung his axe. Suddenly, his weapon broke, hitting the bear's head. The monster's paw immediately approached the guy's head. With one blow, the bear threw Harley back. The guy grabbed his head, realizing that the axe was not the best weapon. The monster did not wait, rushing towards him. The guy tensed his hand. The dragon's scales immediately appeared on his hand. He hit the bear in the jaw. Now the monster's body was thrown back due to the force of the blow. Harley frowned, realizing that it was better for him to fight with his hands than with weapons. Looking at his hand, he told himself that with such monstrous strength, he would not be glorified as a hero. Carefully examining the scales on his hand, he asked himself if he could use the power of mutation without subjecting his body to changes. The guy raised his other hand, deciding to try. Harley closed his eyes and clenched his fist, deciding to focus on drawing power rather than transforming. The flame of energy flared up. The system immediately notified that the conditions had been met and enlightenment had been achieved. A moment later, the system reported the acquisition of a special skill, Bio-Aura. The protagonist bared his teeth and rejoiced. He frowned and looked back. There was a huge giant behind him. The monster raised its leg, wanting to crush him. Harley concentrated his power in his hand, wanting to test his new skill. The ogre stepped on the guy with a slap. The ogre laughed, grinning. His eye widened in shock. Harley smiled while holding the ogre's leg. The veins on his body bulged from the tension as he asked the ogre if he wanted to see what was really funny. The guy frowned deeply and released his aura and screamed. The monster's leg was thrown back. Harley took the axe in his hand and jumped up. The monster raised its hand, trying to block the attack. Harley attacked the monster at high speed. The guy appeared behind the ogre, cut into pieces. He raised his axe up. As the body parts fell, Harley shouted, saying that he would be famous as a hero. Suddenly, his face was distorted by dark mana. He looked deep into the forest, saying that the smell was nostalgic and disgusting at the same time. The guy walked towards the smell. Standing in front of the cave, he said that it turns out there is an oath of rebellion. Harley, warming up, said that he did not know what he was doing in such a remote place, but it was obvious what they were planning. Grinning, he said that he would tear out these rotten shoots by the roots. A moment later, a powerful explosion occurred. Granwood raised a cup of tea, saying that the tea was truly amazing. Putting his hand to his chest, the elf thanked the saint for the warm welcome. Ristar, sitting opposite him, said that their main church sincerely appreciated his presence. Heinrich, standing next to her, frowned. The new ally was not just elves, but high elves. The kingdom of Elven on the continent of Enamel was huge on the map. There, the elves worshipped the world tree. Although the saints served different gods, the divine church and the kingdom of the elves recognized each other and constant exchanges took place. They shook hands, understanding that the recognition of existence and the choice of an object of worship were completely different matters. Looking at the elves in front of him, the guy mentally said that if the high elves came here, then they were planning to find hands using the power of the world tree. The protagonist looked closely at Granwood's eyes and admitted that they resembled stars. The guy shuddered when the elf told him that it seemed that he was attracted by her eyes. The guy, being shocked, asked for forgiveness for staring. Ristar bowed, expressing embarrassment. Granwood pointed to his eye and said that this was indeed a good topic to discuss, as the eyes were a hallmark of a high elf. Elves born with such eyes served as priests at the world tree and connected it and the people, and very few elves were born with this ability. Only 2 or 3 such elves were born in a generation, so when a new one was born, other high elves were already old. Ristar stroked his chin and asked if the urgent request for help was related to this situation. Granwood confirmed this, saying that a special child had been born on the continent of Iona, but he had been captured by slave hunters and sold as a sacrifice to a dark sorcerer, and they wanted to ask the church for help in finding her. The saint pressed her hand to her chest and asked the elf if he had any leads. Clenching his fist in his palm, the man said that they had tracked down the kidnappers in the northern mountains. The events return us to the northern mountains. Harley, having fallen into a cave, was sitting on his knee. He clutched his head when Heinrich asked him to describe the child's appearance. Harley saw a girl with a shackle around her neck off to the side. She looked like an ordinary elf, with light green hair and orange eyes. The protagonist narrowed his eyes, realizing that Granwood had just described the girl Harley had seen. The guy smiled and asked the girl her name. She barely opened her lips when saying her name. She put her hands to her chest, saying that her name was Cecily. Harley put Cecily on his back and fought his way through the crowd of enemies to save her. The villain ordered his comrade to keep them away from the warehouse. The cultist opened his mouth in fear and asked how they were supposed to deal with such a monster. There was a grin on the guy's face. The young man knocked the cultist down. The clone raised his hand to his forehead and asked if this was the warehouse they were talking about. The elf confirmed it. The girl frowned in confusion. The double asked her to get down and show him where the item was, which they must take with them before escaping. The woman pointed to a branch of the world tree, which surprised her savior. The warrior handed her the branch and asked her to hold on tightly. Cecily thanked him. Harley stretched his legs and said that it was time for them to go. The elf said that she had one request. She smiled and asked her friend to slow down. The guy abruptly ran forward, which caused the girl to scream in horror. Heinrich raised his hand and said that he had a suggestion. Granwood smiled and asked what it was about. The boy replied that it was about Cecily. The man raised the cup to his mouth and froze when the clone said that he knew where she was. The high elf placed the cup on the table and asked if he had been blessed to search. The answer was negative. The double looked at his colleague and explained that he felt her presence. The guard frowned and was indignant that they had no specifics in such a critical situation. Ristar raised her hand and asked him to stop. The saint sternly knitted her eyebrows and asked her comrade to explain everything in more detail. The exit from the cave was visible ahead. The cultist looked back and ordered his accomplice to call him, since the enemy was running away. The cultist brought the whistle to his lips and made a loud sound. Harley looked up in amazement. A huge earthworm crawled out from under the stones. The guy said that they had no choice and that they must get out by force, a bright aura shone around his feet. The youth grinned and ordered the monster to get out of his way. The clone kicked the beast. The beast opened its fanged mouth and roared. It had a magic circle in its mouth. The clone concluded that the villains had been controlling it all along. The double lit up its hands and stated that it was confused, as it could not understand why the creature from the desert was here. The warrior grabbed the worm by the fang and promised to save it. A wide smile appeared on his face. Harley threw the monster forward and wished for it to return to its native land. Dust rose into the air from the powerful throw. The boy smoothed his hair and asked the monster not to be seen again and to live a long life. He was surrounded by bloodthirsty wolves. The beasts pounced on him. The young man thought that there were too many monsters here and wondered what the people from the Oath of Disobedience were planning this time. The clone took up his sword and decided to just destroy them all since it did not matter. Watching him fight the wolves, the cultist asked who he was. The cultist folded his hands on his staff and said that tomorrow he would be offered a candidate and a branch of the world tree as a sacrifice, and asked how they knew where the elf was if he had used a sealing artifact to hide its location. Nurub frowned menacingly and said that this was the end. The double held his sword in front of him. The elder said that they would not defeat all these monsters, so this man would die. The wolf tried to bite the enemy. However, his teeth broke on the strong scales. The warrior swung his clawed paw and called the number of enemies incredible. Harley hit the beast in the chest with all his might. A mana stone appeared in his hand. The guy threw it into his mouth and realized that thanks to it, his endurance would become unlimited. The young man bit the stone with his teeth. The wolf approached him from behind. The clone turned into a werewolf and thought about how he could control the mind, but his body moved on its own. The double absorbed the enemy and realized that now he did not need to do anything to defend himself. The warrior spread his arms and let out a battle cry. The system reported that the entity fulfilled the conditions and received enlightenment. His blue eyes lit up. Harley attacked the wolf. The cultist shouted that this could not be. The cultist opened his mouth wide and asked what they should do now, because the enemy could break through their defense. The villain's eyes widened in amazement when Nurub ordered him to activate all summoning circles. The elder looked back and explained that they had no other choice and that they would have to open up to the world so quickly. The man frowned menacingly and ordered his subordinates to release the two. The wolf trembled with fear. The boy said that he liked this bestial way of fighting. The youth swung his hand and offered to end this fight. Suddenly, sharp blades pierced his hand. The clone looked at the wound and asked what it was. The crystal arrow sparkled. At the same time, the arrows flew out of the wound and returned to their owner. The monster clenched them in his hand. The double saw his reflection and wondered what was happening here. In front of him stood a man with a precious stone. The warrior felt the enormous telekinetic power emanating from him. A winged monster appeared in the sky. Cecily warned her friend about the approaching danger. The monster fell to the ground, raising thick snow into the air. The demon gritted his teeth and said that now his opponent would not be able to take a single step. The warrior stopped his hand and asked if there were even devils here. Harley smirked and said that he would not be able to win since he had animal strength. Veins appeared on his neck. The crystal arrow pierced his chest. The stone man raised his hand in front of him. The monster hit the boy on the head. The elf screamed in fear. The demon grinned and called for them to surrender. The devil swung his fiery sword and declared that this was the end. Smiling, the young man confirmed this and was surprised that even a demon could tell the truth. A bright flash flashed in the sky. A powerful explosion was heard on the battlefield. The cultist loudly asked where the sacred energy came from. The paladin covered his comrade with his body. The clone said that he arrived just in time. Heinrich put the sword on his shoulder. Some time ago, when the heroes were in the palace, the guard asked if his lady really wanted to rely on an inaccurate feeling in such an important situation. Ristar asked how one could say such a thing. The saint frowned sternly and said that she trusted her comrade. The guard reminded him that he was not blessed for the quest. The girl put her hand to her chest and said that even the deity itself had shown interest in him and suggested that her friend had received some kind of revelation. Granwood jumped up from the table and explained that it did not matter whether it was a revelation or just a suggestion. Putting his hand on his heart, the man declared that he was ready for any decision if it would lead them to Cecily and asked the paladin to lead him. An explosion was heard in the snowy forest. The doppelganger entered into battle with the monster. Sacred energy concentrated around his sword. Heinrich cut the enemy's body with the weapon. The demon opened his mouth wide and mentally acknowledged his incredible strength and swordsmanship. The crystal man looked at his fallen comrade in horror. Harley swung his fist and asked where his opponent was looking. The monster covered its chest with its hands. It hit the warrior several times. The boy grabbed its head. An arrow pierced his left eye. The young man decided to deprive the enemy of his sight as retribution. A smile lit up his face. The monster's head cracked from the tight grip. It split into many stones. The body of the crystal man fell to the ground. The clone pulled the arrow out of the eye socket. The double took the shard and decided to replace his eye with it. The warrior inserted the crystal into the eye socket. The system reported that a new body part had been transplanted. The new eye lit up. The notification said that the user had received a new skill, pyrokinesis. Harley smiled and realized that he could now attack from a distance. Standing on a cliff, the cultist said that this could not be and asked if the enemies had even killed these two. The cultist opened his mouth in fear and asked who this holy knight was. Nurub asked his subordinates not to rush. Standing in front, the elder explained that there was no one there except for one human and a half-elf, and ordered the rest to release the remaining monsters and prepare to retreat. The scoundrel looked back and asked what this meant. Someone hit him on the head with a mace. Horsemen arrived on the mountain. The knight promised to smash the skulls of the heretics. The man summoned a cloud of dark energy in his hand. The cultist asked what they should do now. The leader of the Oath of Defiance grabbed his hand and said that they would not be able to return now. The cultists were enveloped in dark energy. Nurab said that he must sacrifice their souls. He clenched his teeth and wanted to summon the archdevil. Magic circles appeared above his head. The elder asked the embodiment of greed to descend to them. A clawed paw appeared from the dark energy. The monster crawled out of the magic circle. The villain called on it to turn their enemies into ashes. The man saw a bright light in the sky. The sacred arrow headed towards the demon. The cultist wondered what kind of amazing divine power it was. The arrow pierced the monster's body. The magic circle dissipated in the air. Ladius asked the enemy for forgiveness. The archbishop raised his hand and declared that the only one who would burn today was the heretic. A bright flash lit up the cultist's face. A powerful explosion was heard on the mountain. Heinrich concluded that they were done here. Cecily was hiding behind a tree. Harley asked her to come out. The elf ran up to him and complained that she was scared, stuffy and cramped. The guy replied that everything was fine now. The young man watched them from the side. The clone looked back when someone called out to him. Tuscan smiled and said that they arrived on time thanks to him. The paladin put his hand on his comrade's shoulder and asked how he managed to find out about this. The double replied that it just occurred to him. Granwood worriedly knitted his brows and called out to the child. Kneeling down, the high elf introduced himself and said that he was very pleased to meet him. A smile shone on his face. The warrior was struck by his gaze. Smiling widely, Harley was glad that the girl managed to reunite with her family and said that it was an honor for him to help her. The man thanked him and asked how he could repay him for his help. The boy raised his hand and said that he did not expect a reward. The knight called him a wonderful person and explained that he could not let him go without gratitude. The young man patted him on the shoulder and decided to gladly accept it. The girl closed her eyes and invited him to sit down. She kissed his forehead and rewarded him with a blessing of nature. The clone opened his mouth in surprise and felt the energy of the presence of the world tree. Granwood put his hand to his chest and explained that this high-level charm can only be bestowed by high elves and that it can only be used a limited number of times. Cecily added that she was not a high elf, so the effect would be weaker. The man took off the bracelet and asked his comrade to stretch out his hand. Putting the bracelet on the savior's hand, he said that this was an elven sign of promise and promised to provide assistance at any time when he needed it. The double smiled happily and said that this was a very generous reward. The girl handed him a branch of the world tree. Tuscan noticed that this man had impressive physical capabilities. The paladin crossed his arms over his chest and asked if his colleague knew him. Heinrich replied that this was their first meeting and suggested that they would get along well. The man gestured to the side and explained that intuition can be trusted and that the order should also express gratitude. The boy thought about how they benefited from both the Elven Kingdom and the Great Divine Order. The young man realized that if Harley supported Hubert, he would be able to become an unrivaled merchant. Granwood approached them. Smiling widely, the high elf thanked the knight for a quick solution to the problem and said that now it was their turn to help. Putting his hand to his chest, Tuscan said that this gave him confidence and asked his ally to find the immortal king for the sake of peace on earth. The clone looked away and realized that they had made contact with the elves only for this. The world tree has roots deep underground. It can connect with all the trees on the planet. The man clasped his hands. The high elves can draw on its energy and feel the energy of any place where there are trees. Granwood raised his index finger and said that he also needed help. The paladin closed his eyes. The elf explained that he needed to know something about the energy of the immortal king. Blue particles sparkled in the sky above the palace. The double was surprised that he had a chance to visit this place again. The man with the torch accompanied the heroes to the basement. Every time Heinrich saw this huge sacred barrier, he thought that he would not be able to reach such a level. The heroes walked through the catacombs. The guy realized that whenever outsiders are involved, they deliberately walk in a confusing way, like a labyrinth. The young man decided that even hands would need too much time to overcome such a barrier. The man in the mask stopped and said that they were there. There was a stone door in front of them. The clone thought that even if someone managed to break through and enter, all the paladins and high priests would gather there. The doors opened. The double tensely clenched his fist. Granwood saw a fragment of the legendary immortal king in front of him and decided to find his tracks. The high elf clasped his hands in a lock. The paladin realized that he would begin to pursue Hans. Heinrich looked up in fear and decided that all the elite forces would be mobilized against his comrade. The guy smiled and realized that they had one way out. The young man imagined a burning stone in his hand and thought that he would be able to get the last fragment on this day. There was an empty chair in the center of the hall. Someone said that the time had come. A fire lit up above the table in the conference room. A voice asked if everyone was there. The representative of the Empire raised his hand and confirmed his presence. The representative of the East crossed his arms over his chest and did the same. A haze illuminated the empty chair. The unknown said that Nurab was dead. The dark being placed his hand on the table and suggested that everyone had heard about it, but they still did not know how the Paladin Order and the High Elves were able to track them down. The stranger smirked and told them that the enemy had already killed 2 of their comrades and asked if they were becoming too careless. The cultist turned his head and said that the rebirth of the Order should mark the arrival of the heir to the Immortal King. The cultist raised his hand and asked if they could not use the new heir to their advantage. The representative of the East asked if they were proposing to join forces with the fake that had cornered them. The stranger smirked and found it an interesting idea. The cave was hazy. Ristar clasped her hands. Hans thought that no matter how many layers of barrier were installed and how deep in the mountains he hid, they could still track him. The skeleton raised his hand and assumed that the saint had sensed his fragment. The corpse walked up to the portal and realized that he needed to hide the fragment. The clone carefully placed the stone in the subspace he had created. The portal ejected it out, the double deducing that the fragment could not be placed in a normal subspace. Hans rubbed his chin and decided that he could return to Earth with it if he woke up. Lightning flashed in his chest. The skeleton wondered what would happen if he created a subspace inside his body and transferred the fragment that way. The corpse spread his arms and realized that he would become one with it. The boy looked at the stone in his chest and realized that he had succeeded. A dark aura appeared around him, the young man deducing that he could use the power of the fragment and hide any traces of his energy. Hans smiled and thought that this solved his biggest problem. He looked around and decided that he needed to clean up the crime scene. The skeleton snapped his fingers and wanted to burn everything to the ground. A fire started behind him, and the dead man realized that everything was ready. The boy raised his hand and decided to remove all barriers. The young man went outside and declared that his scent would spread throughout the entire earth. Releasing waves of dark energy into the sky, Hans called on the Great Divine Order to come and find him and said that he would take the last fragment of the Immortal King himself. A green sphere was flying near the tree. A seal appeared on it. Granwood put his finger to his forehead and reported that he had found traces and that the Immortal King was in the monster forest in the west of the continent. Ladius looked at the guards and ordered them to immediately call the paladins and archbishops. The man standing behind them was very offended and asked why they did not call him, since the matter was so important. Purius from the great temple of Geron stepped forward and declared that he would join them. The knight smiled awkwardly, remembering that this was the most revered figure in the great temple of Geron, and decided that this was encouraging since they had gathered all the best. Ristar approached him and said that she would go with them too. The man put his hand to his chest and said that this would not happen. The saint tried to object. She looked away when Ladius called her a pillar of the Great Divine Order and asked her to stay here. The archbishop then turned to Heinrich and called out to him. The knight frowned and asked him to stay here as well and guard the great temple along with the saint. The man leaned towards him and ordered him to protect the saint if anything happened while they were gone. After that, he turned around and left. The boy smiled and thought that Ristar would be safe and sound. The people came out to the square in front of the palace. Someone said that they would soon face the nightmare of the continent again. Ladius raised his sword in the air and shouted that this nightmare would be nothing more than a dream because the deity was watching over them. A pillar of light shot into the sky. The archbishop said that they were doing this for the sake of peace and salvation. The boy looked at the saint and asked her not to worry so much. The clone expressed confidence that they would all return alive. The girl raised her eyebrows and asked if the deity had given him another revelation. Smiling, the double denied this and explained that he had a good feeling. The man in the robe walked across the square. Hans approached the fortress wall and thought that his dark mana was ready. There were hieroglyphs on the walls. The skeleton felt that this was a holy barrier. The corpse summoned a clot of energy in his hand and realized that the internal barriers would remain in place even if he managed to slip through the walls. The clone raised his hand above his head and decided to get rid of them to buy some time. Several explosions occurred in the sky above him. The guard looked up and asked what it was. The knight looked down and shouted that they were under attack. A crowd of monsters was approaching the fortress wall. The full moon shone in the sky. The members of the order examined the area around the mountain. The paladin reported that they carefully examined the entire area where the presence of the enemy was detected, but found nothing. The heroes approached the cave. Granwood said that this could not be. The high elf opened his mouth wide and expressed confidence that they were in the right place, as the world tree would have told him immediately if the villain had left. Ladius' eyes widened in shock and assumed that the immortal king had realized he was being watched and had cast some kind of spell. The archbishop turned and shouted that the enemy had tricked them and ordered everyone to return to the great temple immediately. The main square was littered with corpses and fires raged around them. Hans stepped forward and declared that they had finally met. In front of him, on the fountain, lay the last fragment. Flames ignited in his chest. Lightning flashed in his eyes as the skeleton announced that the time had come for the immortal king to be resurrected. A bell rang in the tower. The knights ran forward. Someone shouted that the undead were attacking. Watching them, Heinrich realized that they were now in big trouble and mentally wished them luck. The boy crossed his arms and remembered that he was assigned to guard the garden. The boy smiled and decided to just wait here and then hide quietly. The guards ran out of the barracks. Someone ordered them not to stop. Looking at them, the clone thought that there were more of them than expected and that there were people here that he had never seen before. The double scratched his cheek and decided that it did not matter because they still did not know that Hans was already on the target because they were distracted by the undead outside and inside the castle. The ghost of the man raised his hand and exclaimed that the undead outside the castle were a trap. The masked man looked up and said that the heir of the immortal king was already close to the target, so they needed to go to the sealing chamber. The paladin's mouth fell open in shock and wondered how they had figured it out so quickly. Heinrich jumped over the fence and decided that he had to intervene before this turned into a complete disaster. Debris was falling from the ceiling. Someone said that it couldn't be. The heroes walked down the corridor of the catacombs. Ristar asked how the intruder managed to get to the sealing chamber without being noticed. The knight noted that there was not even any sign of an intruder. The saint looked at him and asked if the enemy had teleported. The paladin replied that they could not know. Trembling with fear, the girl could not believe that the immortal king was so close and they did not notice anything, and decided that it was her fault. Tears appeared in her eyes. The woman wondered what they should do now. Someone apologized for being late. The man stepped forward and said that the road was too congested. The boy smiled and said that he would take charge. Ristar smiled happily when she saw him and asked him to lend them his power. The Inquisitor lay on the floor. Hans was surprised that the enemies were able to destroy a huge army of the undead. The mask on the man's face was broken. The skeleton realized that the enemy was tougher than expected. The corpse smirked and called Malcolm a tough opponent. The clone immersed the corpse in dark energy and asked him to rest in peace. The double approached the fragment and was glad that, in the end, he managed to achieve his goal. A purple fire ignited in his chest. The last fragment of the immortal king trembled. Dark energy enveloped the sealing room. Throwing his hands in front of the shining stone, Hans felt a sense of incompleteness and assumed that it took some time for the fragments to completely merge. The skeleton heard a loud sound and turned around. The warriors pounced on him. The corpse raised his hand and summoned a cloud of energy. A dark haze enveloped the paladins. Their bodies fell to the ground. Latius cupped his hands together to heal them. A bright light shone in the knight's chest. Heinrich frowned and shouted that he could not stand there and do nothing. Ristar grabbed his hand and asked him to stop. With her mouth wide open, the saint explained that they first needed to analyze the power of the immortal king and asked her friend to stay in his position for a little while longer. The boy grabbed his head in his thoughts and thought that his plan was to stall for time by pretending to fight. The warriors grabbed their weapons. The heir of the immortal king offered them to surrender because the fragment was already his. The archbishop asked his comrades not to listen to him. Summoning a cloud of black energy, Hans wanted to destroy them with all his power, but decided that he could not take the lives of innocents. Holy spears flashed in the air. They pierced the skeleton's shoulder. The girl clasped her hands together. The corpse deduced that it was her spell. Looking ahead, the clone realized that the danger would have been real if he had not strengthened his regeneration, and thought about how he could not drag out the battle to avoid casualties. The double released dark arrows and wanted to destroy the command tower first. The archbishop put up a holy shield in front of him. The heir of the immortal king was outraged by his quick reaction. The paladin swung his sword. Hans thought about how the enemy not only instantly blocked his attack, but also counterattacked without hesitation, and realized that they were attacking with absolute confidence that they would not be killed. Lowering his head, the skeleton assumed that one of them understood his strategy and passed it on to the others, and wondered if he should look into their heads. The man appeared next to him and asked where he was looking. The woman, emitting a bright light, asked if he had failed to fully absorb the fragment. Ristar released her holy arrows and declared that the time had come. The warrior rushed forward. The dead man realized that they were attacking him with spells and swords at the same time to prevent him from regenerating. The clone put up a barrier in front of him and called their trick too obvious. The paladin snuck up behind him and offered to see if he could block this obvious move. The doppelganger flashed his glowing eyes and asked if the enemy was actually trying to provoke him with such a half-hearted attack. Waves of dark energy appeared around the knight. The man was chained in a cage. The heroes looked at him in fear. The warrior asked how the enemy could calculate his every move and said that he should have blocked any psychic intrusion. Smiling, Heinrich mentally apologized to him and thought about how he could not help. The paladin rose to his feet. The heir to the immortal king laughed. Hans smirked and said that it was too late, as the fragment was already in him. Spikes appeared on the shining stone. The skeleton announced that he had completely merged with it. The corpse spread its arms and laughed maliciously. A powerful energy fell upon the heroes. Ristar covered her mouth with her hands and realized that it was too late to do anything. A cluster of dark aura appeared around the clone. The saint realized that the immortal king was about to be reborn. The double's eyes lit up. He noticed how the minions of the order were shaking in fear. The heir was dressed in a black robe with white chains. The system reported that the user had experienced death and surpassed it. Hans opened his eyes wide and announced the return of the Immortal King. The guards ran forward. Someone shouted that they were almost at the sealing room. Suddenly, the guards froze in place. The skeleton's hands were covered in steel gloves. The knights saw the Immortal King in front of them and realized they were too late. The paladin covered Ristar with his hand and said that this sacred space suppresses the power of the disaster. Peony looked back and said that they would put their lives on the line to stop the demon. The warriors rushed to attack. Frowning in displeasure, the corpse asked if they really thought they could stop him, and thought to himself that they did not see his status window, so they were so easily misled. Notifications about receiving new abilities appeared above his head. The clone grinned and called himself invincible. The guards approached him. The double wanted to show them the true power of the Immortal King. The heir covered his face with his hand. Hans removed it and used the Eye of Darkness skill. The guard opened his mouth in horror. Worms crawled out from under the skin on his hand. It turned out that this skill instills fear and takes control of low-ranking demons. The knight frowned menacingly and ordered his subordinates not to look the enemy in the eye under any circumstances. The skeleton raised his hand and decided that it was their turn. The corpse raised his hand above his head and summoned his legion. The paladin turned around and noticed how the bones and corpses were gathering around the enemy. The skulls gathered in one place. A corpse golem appeared behind the clone. The monster swung its hand. The captain ordered his subordinates to avoid it. The monster slammed its hand on the ground with force, throwing the opponents back. The double frowned and suggested to end this. The saint looked up in fear. The girl pressed her hand to her chest and thought that if she doubted, not only the church, but the entire continent would be in danger. The woman looked at her comrade and called out to him. Ristar took off her cross and asked her friend to take it and retreat. Heinrich raised his eyebrows in surprise. The saint urged him to become stronger and stop the Immortal King. Turning around, the girl declared that they must clear the way for the paladin and ordered the guards to protect him even at the cost of their lives. She frowned sternly and said that the knight must escape safely. The guards rushed forward to stop the Immortal King. The man appeared behind the enemy. The heir declared that he would destroy them with one wave of his hand. Hans immediately turned around. The knight swung his sword. The skeleton called his action stupid. Dark magic fettered his neck. The paladin said that they still achieved their goal. The warrior gritted his teeth and explained that he was ready to throw at him as many times as it took if they could save Heinrich. The corpse lifted him into the air and called him a fool. The clone wished to smash his skull, but suddenly someone swung a fist. The knight hit the villain in the face. The boy threw the double back. The youth frowned sternly and used a blessed jump. He swung his sword behind the enemy. He managed to push the enemy back. The heir covered his face with his hands and called his movements quite good. The Immortal King lifted him into the air and declared that this sword was too dull to pierce him. The warrior clenched his teeth tensely as ice arrows approached him. The knight smiled and noted that the enemy had only pierced his armor. A powerful explosion was heard on the battlefield. The saint closed her eyes and asked why he did this, since she trusted him with their future. The wounded paladin lowered his head and said that he did not join the church to save his life. Holding a cross in his hands, Heinrich asked how someone who cowardly turned away from comrades who were ready to die for a great cause could protect the world. A bright light lit up in his hand. The boy picked up the sword and asked why the Immortal King called his weapon dull. The young man swung his sword and shouted that he would defeat him if his sword broke today. The system reported that the user had achieved enlightenment. Burning hieroglyphs appeared on the blade. The warrior realized that this was his third blessing. The paladin raised his sword to strike and decided to move towards completion. The sharp sword pierced hands through. Approaching him, the knight mentally called this production beautiful and wanted to make final edits. Ristar watched what was happening in fear. The skeleton looked at his wound and asked the name of the church minister. Heinrich opened his mouth wide and said his name. The dark creature grinned and asked how he dared to wound him. The notification reported that the immunity to instant death had worked. The corpse melted into thin air and promised to remember this name. The guy frowned in confusion and asked if the enemy had escaped. The young man could not stay on his feet. Someone picked him up. The knight picked him up and was surprised that he managed to hit the Immortal King's heart. The clone smiled. The paladin concluded that this was the resurrection of the Chosen One. Someone clapped their hands and said that this heroic tale brings tears to one's eyes. When the double pierced the body of the resurrected Immortal King, he received a divine blessing. Sitting on the couch, the protagonist decided that this was the perfect rivalry between the hero and the Demon King. Poking at the system window, Xianghan realized that he only had to collect money and decided to pay the entrance fee. A karma shop appeared in front of him. The guy was glad that he had almost accumulated 1,000,000 points. The young man clicked on the improvement of the unique skill and said that he had nothing to worry about. A bright light illuminated his face. The system reported that the user received the special skill customization. The player extended his hand forward. A window for choosing the appearance of the Immortal King appeared in front of him. The protagonist understood what this game was really about. The avatar creation and modification icons appeared, which were opened by the newly acquired customization skill. An image of hands appeared on the screen. Modification allowed you to change the appearance, characteristics, and other attributes of existing avatars. Then an image of a clone appeared. Avatar creation allowed you to set the appearance and skills only once at the very beginning. Xiangyan smiled widely and realized that the most important thing was that he was now able to choose his gender. The icons of Venus and Mars appeared on the system window. The guy raised his eyebrows and thought that he did not have any strange intentions. He clicked on the Venus icon to see what differences there were between the avatars of the two genders. The young man's mouth fell open in surprise when he saw that this option was not available to him. A notification about the possibility of creating your own race appeared in front of him. The player looked at the houseplant and asked if the branch of the world tree that Cecily gave him would be suitable for this. Taking the pot, the protagonist thought that he really liked the branch since it works as an eco-friendly air purifier, but decided that he had no other choice. Xiangyan summoned a magic circle in front of him and realized that it was simply necessary in order to create an elf. A tree sprouted on the ground. An elf appeared from its branches. The avatar looked to the side. The guy remembered that customization was now available to him. The clone's hair became lighter. The young man decided to make him as beautiful as possible. The double straightened his fingers. The player wanted to create long arms and legs for him. He smiled broadly and said that elves are usually spiritual mages. The protagonist ran his finger across the system window and said that the most important thing in the distribution of characteristics is the contribution to closeness to nature. Harris put his hand on his belt. A status window appeared, which said that the growth rate of closeness to nature was increased due to the effect of the child of the world tree. Xiangyan happily looked at the new avatar and noticed his perfect body and cute face. The clone frowned and said that he was very upset. The double covered his mouth with his hand. The guy wondered what it meant. The young man imagined a dying sprout and felt as if the whole body of his new avatar was rotting from Hans's dark magic. The player clenched his teeth and thought that this could not be happening. He raised his hand and cancelled the summoning of the immortal king. A cloud of smoke appeared in the room. The protagonist realized that even the center of the mind did not work and was upset that he almost lost the avatar he had just created. Xiangyan looked at the shelf and decided to put this matter off for later. The guy took out a book about Conan the Barbarian. The young man smiled and wondered if this time he should try to write the legend of the mercenary king. The wolf flapped his ears. Harley wrapped himself in the beast's skin and said that he really liked it. The girl laughed. The door of the shop slammed shut. Walking down the street, the clone was happy that Hubert had found the perfect item for him and declared that he was in the city of artisans, Ottera. With a smile on his face, the duplicate remembered that some people had been causing trouble in his friend's shop lately and decided to go there to teach them a lesson. The people sitting at the table were outraged by his appearance. The stranger said that it was not for nothing that they say that Southerners are savages. The man spat to the side and asked the passerby not to embarrass the Southerners. The warrior turned and called out to him. Harley clenched his fist and asked who dared to insult the Southerners. The scoundrel raised his club and asked him to stand still, wanting to hit him so that he would finally wake up. The guy broke his weapon with his hand. The stranger opened his mouth in shock. The young man's eyes widened and he wondered if these were really Southern warriors. The guys stared at him tensely. The clone smirked and realized that the great hero of the South and his close comrades would acknowledge him if he followed them. The double imagined himself sitting on the throne and decided that he would become a real Southern warrior. The brunette poked him in the chest and asked him to put on normal clothes and wear them only on traditional holidays. Harley looked at the wolf skin and asked if people didn't wear things like that anymore. The man frowned furiously and said that he couldn't listen to this anymore. The stranger punched the ground and challenged him to a traditional Southern duel. The guy waved his hand and warned that he had one condition. The young man put up 3 fingers and asked the Southerners to fight together. The guys opened their mouths in displeasure and were outraged by such an insulting condition. The clone raised 2 fingers and explained that only 2 would attack. Smiling slyly, he added that the remaining 1 would help the others when they surrendered. Passers-by widened their eyes in fear. A powerful explosion was heard on the city street. 2 of the 3 villains fell to the ground. The third called what was happening madness. Pointing his finger at his opponent, the man realized that he was not a Southerner in front of him and noticed that he did not have a single warrior's mark. The double scratched the back of his head and decided to think of something. Throwing up his hands, Harley called himself a Southern warrior and explained that there was a reason why he did not have a mark. The stranger asked what he was talking about. A film flashed. This happened about 20 years ago. A duel was taking place in the arena to determine the next chief of the tribe. A warrior hit his opponent in the face. The winner raised his hand above his head, and the boy explained that it was his father, the strongest warrior in the tribe. The old man raised his eyebrows and congratulated him on his victory, explaining that according to their tribe's tradition, they would grant him one wish. The man frowned and said that he had made up his mind about the wish at the beginning of the duel. The winner pointed at the girl and said that he did not want to marry the chief's daughter. The woman frowned and asked how he dared to make such an absurd wish. The warrior closed his eyes and explained that he had a good reason for it. The girl shuddered in surprise when the man announced that they were blood relatives and asked what that meant. She looked at her father and asked if he would really allow him to talk such nonsense. Covering his face with his hand, the chief apologized and said that it was true. The woman gritted her teeth as the old man called her not his daughter. The winner clenched his fist as the girl ordered the guards to kill him. The warrior frowned and ordered his beloved to flee. The peasant woman frowned sadly. The young man explained that his mother was pregnant with him and could not fight for her beloved. The guards dealt with the man. The clone explained that his father fought the tribe alone and died heroically to protect his family. The little boy rose to his feet. The double added that his mother was able to escape and hide in a cave nearby. Harley closed his eyes and said that she died due to illness. The strangers trembled. The boy said that this is why he does not have a mark. Passers-by cried at how heartbreaking this story was. They rushed to the young man with hugs and apologized for misunderstanding him. The mercenary closed his eyes and was surprised at how tragic his past was. The clone smirked and thought that it was all just cool acting. The heroes clinked beer mugs to drink to their new brother. The guys sat at the table. The man asked what brought him here. The double answered that he had a story about that too. The warrior clenched his teeth and explained that he had nothing left after his mother passed away. Harley stood in front of the grave in complete confusion, not knowing what to do and how to live on. Someone came up to him from behind and decided to talk to him. Hubert smiled and asked if he needed any help. The guy told him that it was a young merchant who is now one of his closest friends. Holding a beer mug in his hands, the young man added that this man did his best to help him get settled in life, but now he has serious problems with some bandits. The clone explained that he couldn't ignore it and came here to help. The man slammed his fist on the table and said that it was just terrible. The guys opened their mouths wide and screamed that their brother's enemy was their enemy too. The double smiled happily when the heroes promised to do everything possible to lend a helping hand to their brother's brother. Harley hugged and thanked them. The guy smiled and decided to use them to silence the villains threatening Hubert. A hand with seeds appeared in front of the planet. The young man thought about starting a creative economy project and importing a ton of pepper from Earth because it is a rare and valuable spice. In his other hand, Earth appeared. The clone wanted to spread magical tools on Earth, which are in short supply there. The merchant sat on the throne. The double realized that he would make a good profit, which he would use to open the way to even more explosive growth. The man headed towards the exit of the tavern and said that they would go to the store and guard his comrade. The warrior stated that he relied on their help. Smiling widely, Harley thought about how having trustworthy comrades made his life much easier and wanted to go further and begin his debut as an elf. Harris approached the gates of the castle. He approached the guards and asked if this was really the great temple of Roselia. The guy smiled and introduced himself as an experienced mercenary and a close friend of Harley, who in turn is a close friend of the Holy Knightly Order. Putting his hand to his chest, the young man said that he came here as soon as he heard that the elven envoy was here and asked if he could have an audience. The guard opened the parchment with the letter of introduction and cancelled the funny handwriting and drawings on it. The clone brushed his hair with his hand. The knight stated that he had no doubt that this was a letter of introduction written by Harley. The guard pointed to the side and said that he would lead the guest to the chambers of the elven envoys. The heroes stopped at the door. The guard said that he had already reported the guest's arrival to the lord. The double thanked him. Harris went inside. Granwood said that he was very glad to meet him. Extending his hand forward, the high elf introduced himself and asked the guest to sit down. The guy thanked him for taking the time to meet him and thought about how difficult it was for him to pretend that they were strangers every time. The young man frowned and decided that this was even interesting. The man's eyes sparkled. The clone noticed that he felt as if he was drowning in them and falling asleep. The clone put his hand to his chest, trying to resist this feeling. The lord took a sip of tea and asked if this was really Harley's close and dear friend. Granwood noticed a gold bracelet on the guest's hand, a gift to the warrior. Covering it with his hand, the double asked for forgiveness and promised to return the bracelet to the owner if it offended him. The high elf replied that everything was fine, and on the contrary, he was glad that his relative was using this bracelet. The man raised his hand and said that his brother wanted to ask him about something. With a stern frown, Harris explained that he wanted to learn how to use the power of nature and make a contract with spirits, and added that he spent most of his life alone and was unable to develop these skills. The lord frowned and said that he understood everything. He saw a green aura around his guest and decided that there was no doubt in his abilities. Granwood got to his feet and suggested going outside for some fresh air. The stars were shining in the sky. The high elf put his hand on the fence and explained that he would not be able to teach his friend because he would soon leave this place. The man raised his hand and invited him to visit the elven kingdom with him. The guy smiled awkwardly. The young man introduced the land of the elves, located on the continent of Enamel, where the University of the High Elves was located. Raising his hand, the clone said that it was a great honor for him and asked if he did not need special skills for this. The Lord replied that only children of the High Elves could get there. He smiled and stated that there was one exception. The double felt a strong pressure. Harris frowned in confusion and asked what he was talking about. Granwood explained that he meant an elf who had the skills of the High Ones. He flashed his eyes and decided that the guest felt something when he looked into them. The guy noticed that his bracelet was on fire and felt a familiar sensation. The young man squinted and realized that he was being pulled somewhere again. The full moon was shining above his head. The clone wondered what kind of place this was. The double's eyes widened in fear and decided that this was some kind of mental sphere, similar to the one in which they fought the Divine Retribution Society. Harris looked around. His mouth opened in surprise and thought that this couldn't be. A leaf fell on the man's hand. The girl immediately blew it away. She was sitting on the branches of a tree. The guy looked at her and realized that this was the world tree. The woman lowered her leg. The stranger jumped down to her guest. The young man smiled awkwardly and asked her to stop. The girl put her hand on his cheek. There was a sweet smile on her face. The clone blushed with embarrassment and wondered what was going on. The world tree stroked his cheek and spoke to him in an unknown language. The woman smiled and asked him to go to the kingdom of the elves. Her body turned into a gust of wind. The double asked what she had just said. He raised his hand and said he had no idea what it all meant. There was a flash in the air. Harris appeared on the balcony and repeated his question. The boy looked around and asked what had just happened. The high elf explained that his brother had sensed the presence of the world tree. The youth put his hand to his chest and asked if the girl was the world tree. The man closed his eyes and explained that she had decided to incarnate in the form of the tree, but greeted him in the most familiar form. The clone shuddered tensely when the Lord said that the world tree had shown a special interest in him. The double's eyes widened in amazement. The protagonist imagined his avatars standing on Earth and was surprised that first the goddess and now the world tree had paid attention to him. The sun illuminated a trading post, from which someone's indignation was heard. The bandit put his hand on his belt and reminded him that he had ordered the owner to close the store and get out of town. Hubert took a cup of tea and apologized for his rudeness. With a stern frown, the guy said that very tasty tea had arrived this week and offered the bandit to drink it with him. The scoundrel knocked the cup out of his hands and decided that he did not understand what was wanted from him. The cup fell to the floor and broke. The man ordered the young man to leave this place and go away if he did not want to die right here. The clone looked at the blade of the knife and asked if they really did not like the tea that much. The southern warriors stood behind him. The double said that they liked this tea very much. The mercenary hit the bandit in the lower jaw when he tried to say something. His body collapsed to the floor. His accomplices looked around and asked who they were and where they came from. Harley and his comrades rushed to the attack. Cries for help rang out over the sunny streets of the city. Night had fallen. The lights were on in the shop. The guys were sitting at the table. The warrior said that thanks to his comrades his friend was now safe and promised to pay for all their drinks. The man clenched his fist and said that he was convinced that he needed a real mark. He took off his shirt and said that he had one. There was a tattoo on his chest. The brunette explained that it was a real warrior's mark. The hero's eyes widened in surprise. The southerner suggested that his friend go to a local shaman who could tattoo them. The guy put his hand on his shoulder. The young man grabbed his comrade by the arm and decided to go there right away. The clone ran up the stairs. Leuven shouted that he had not finished his beer yet. Leaves and potion bottles fell from the table. The woman bent down to collect them. The robber reminded her that he had asked her to prepare money for today. The old woman closed her eyes and was indignant at being asked for such a large sum of money and asked where she would get such a huge amount of money. The bandit grabbed her by the shirt and asked her what she didn't understand. Pointing to the plaster on his street, the scoundrel said that he had had a terrible day today and asked if she really didn't have any money. The man lifted the merchant into the air and ordered her to find the money, no matter what it took. Suddenly, he looked back and opened his mouth in surprise. Suddenly, his eyes widened in horror. Harley was running straight towards him with a grin on his face. The guy knocked the bandit down with one blow. Holding his friend in his arms, the young man said that he came here to carve a warrior's mark. The bandits lay unconscious on the ground. The shaman asked what he was going to do with them. The clone replied that they would decide for themselves when they woke up. The woman scratched her cheek and invited her savior inside. The heroes sat down at the table. The double asked if the owner of the store could make him a mark. The old woman put her hand on her belt and told him that on the one hand the coat of arms gives great strength, but on the other hand it takes away a huge amount of life energy. Grinning, she said that she had not seen people with a level of life energy like a monster for a long time, and added that her guest was very lucky since with his endurance it was possible to put the main mark of a military ruler. Harley smiled broadly and asked her to quickly make him a mark. The shaman replied that she could not do it. The merchant covered her ears with her hands and explained that this was a technique that no one had been able to master, and all this time, the guy was very upset. He pointed at his friend and asked the owner of the store to make him the same mark as his. The woman lit a pipe and said that there was one problem with this too. The old woman frowned and said that it had been a long time since she had last made a mark, so she did not have the necessary materials. The young man's eyes widened in surprise when the shaman said that he would need to perform a feat to get a mark. A smirk appeared on her face. The smoke from her pipe turned into an orc, and the merchant told her that behind the iron fortress in the northern mountains there lived an ogre that needed to be destroyed. Leuven slammed his fist on the table and asked if she knew what kind of monster it was. Putting his hand to his chest, the man exclaimed that his head alone was the size of his brother and asked how his comrade could destroy it alone. The clone took out a giant skull and asked if this was the monster they were talking about. The devil placed the skull on the table, and the woman clarified whether the warrior had killed it alone. Harley smiled widely and confirmed this, saying that it would be very easy. The old woman put her hand to her head and asked him to come back in a few days. Heading to the utility room, the shaman explained that she did not have the strength to go to the last place and that it took a lot of stamina to put the mark. She shuddered in surprise when the guy asked her to let him do it, since restoring life energy was his specialty. The merchant noticed that her client had already left and hoped that he would not get into trouble. It was dark outside, screams were heard. The young man hit the same robber. The bandit fell to the ground. The clone said that they met very often today. The scoundrel covered his nose with his hand and asked what he needed. The clone explained that they had messed with the wrong people and offended their shaman. The man trembled with fear and asked if the old woman was really the southern shaman. The double clenched his fist and smiled when the robber apologized and said that they had confused her with an ordinary healer. The warrior punched the ground. The bandit promised that he would never touch it again. The villain looked at Harley with fear, who said that they had better keep their promise. Holding the man by the collar, Leuven asked what they should do now. Grinning, the guy said that he knew there were a lot of bandits here and expected situations like this, and asked his friend to help him carry these boxes. One of them contained fresh meat. The young man wanted to have a barbecue today.